Hello, Mario, can you hear us now? I think so, no? Yes? We cannot hear you, but now you can hear us.
Now, can you hear me?
We can hear you, but very low.
Oh, hold on. Better?
Yes, that's perfect. So I already made you co-host, so you will be able to share your screen with no problem. As Aranzatu told you, the director of the school and the director of the Architectural Association is going to give some welcoming words, and then Aranzatu will take the mic and will explain the session, and then I think she will give you the stage, so you can you can share the screen. Okay.
All right, I'll be here.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Sí. Vale. No problema. Pero ahora nosotros no estamos grabando, ¿no? Para que no se nos oye. Pasa que él va a compartir pantalla, o sea que... sí. Sí, de todas formas, el film cuando está compartiendo siempre está, digamos, en primera cámara. Vale. O sea que eso, en la misma aplicación se queda la cosa. Si alguien comparta Zoom, se ve en la primera cámara del film.
Pablo. ¿Ya? Pablo, recuérdame tu apellido.
Bueno. ¿Qué expectación? Una cosa como... Bueno.
Hola.
No, si os parece, no vamos a esperar mucho más y supongo que habrá personas, como vemos, que se irán uniendo a la tarde. Primero, buenas tardes a todas y a todos y muchísimas gracias por estar aquí. Sé que no es una hora precisamente estupenda para este tipo de actos, pero es lo que tenemos. Por hacer una pequeña introducción, muy leve, por cierto, de qué va este asunto, hace como 6-7 meses una conversación con Jaime Ferrer, con el director de departamento de proyectos de la Escuela de Barcelona, empezamos a hablar de la introducción del mundo de la inteligencia artificial en la docencia reglada, ¿no? y nos propusimos tener un intercambio entre Madrid y Barcelona, un intercambio que venimos desarrollando desde hace bastante tiempo, y inmediatamente nos pusimos en contacto con Lluís para que, digamos que de alguna manera lidera este asunto en Barcelona, para ver qué podíamos hacer, ¿no? ¿Qué hemos hecho? Pues hemos contado, obviamente, con el apoyo del Colegio de Arquitectos de Madrid, bastante impresionante para mí, ¿no? Porque el departamento y el colegio nunca habían colaborado, y supongo que, como está Pablo, ese asunto se ha desactivado y entramos en colaboración. Por tanto, Pablo, muchísimas gracias. Y por otra parte, con nuestro rectorado y, por supuesto, con la ayuda inestimable de la escuela. Por tanto, este es un acto que posiblemente alguien piense que organiza el Departamento de Proyectos, pero a mí me gustaría pensar que lo organiza la escuela y que lo organiza el colegio. Y, por lo tanto, dos instituciones de indudable peso en Madrid, obviamente, pero también en este país, se unen para tratar un asunto desde el punto de vista académico, desde el punto de vista profesional, de una importancia trascendental. Por lo tanto, muchísimas gracias a los dos. Ya sabéis que este asunto se va a desarrollar parte en la escuela, pero también en el colegio. Por otra parte, muchas gracias al comité organizador, y muchas gracias, Rodrigo, que tú has sido el brazo armado de este asunto, ¿no? Bueno, ya el comité organizador, tú ahora subes y haces la lectura general del ramo. Claro que sí, que Darío y Lucía, ¿no? Por tanto, muchísimas gracias, espero que lo paséis bien, o que lo pasemos bien esta tarde, y Pablo, si te parece, te cedo la palabra y a ello.
Pues nada, gracias, Andrés. Bueno, sí, como dices, pues después de esta llamada que tuvisteis hace varios meses, luego nos llamasteis, Rodrigo y tú, y bueno, yo creo que fue a través de Lluís, además, que sí, habíamos hecho, yo había hecho ya una intentona con el Colegio de Barcelona, que hizo unas jornadas muy interesantes, que tú también organizaste, Lluís, y nosotros llevábamos tiempo queriendo hacer algo serio sobre la inteligencia artificial, ¿no? Porque no sé vuestra experiencia, pero la mía recientemente es que cada vez que te hablan sobre inteligencia artificial parece que te están dando una conferencia sobre Revit, ¿no? Y realmente estábamos algo preocupados porque no ya liderar, que yo creo que es una ambición que debemos y tenemos que tener, ¿no? Tanto la escuela, vosotros dentro de la formación y del aprendizaje, y nosotros desde el enfoque profesional, sino ya llegar a unos básicos de entendimiento y de manejo, ¿no? Que cuando salga la conversación con un cliente o en un entorno laboral y profesional, pues que tengamos la suficiente formación, por lo menos, para hablar con propiedad, entender del tema y realmente estar en una posición, ya digo, que cuanto más avanzada mejor, y teníamos esta impresión de que andábamos un pasito por detrás. O sea que por eso, cuando ya nos llamasteis, dijimos, pues yo ya encontré perfecto, y además hemos cogido impulso y hemos creado muy recientemente el IA Lab COAM, que hemos llamado, que digamos que es este paraguas que aglutine de alguna manera pues todos los actos que puedan ser, debates, talleres, conferencias, ¿no? Y digamos dentro de una estrategia en la que no vayan siendo como actos salpicados, y bueno, de alguna manera este es el primer acto que habéis organizado vosotros, es así, nosotros simplemente nos hemos unido a ello, y realmente con el empuje de Rodrigo y de todo el equipo que está, pues la verdad es que nos ha parecido una estructura muy profesional y muy competente, ¿no? Como veremos seguro, ya habréis visto esta mañana y seguiremos viendo ahora, ¿no? Y además comentamos que la parte que fuera en la escuela, que son estos 3 actos, ¿no? Esta mañana, esta tarde y mañana, y luego en el colegio serán mañana por la tarde una mesa redonda y el viernes por la mañana un taller, que las de aquí fueran más enfocadas a la docencia, a los alumnos y tal, y las del colegio estuvieran más enfocadas al lado profesional, ¿no? Porque nosotros nos parece muy interesante que no solo hablemos de lo que habla todo el mundo ahora, que será la inteligencia artificial en el diseño paramétrico, ¿no? sino también en la gestión de los proyectos y en la gestión de la estructura de los propios estudios, ¿no? Dentro de los proyectos, ¿no? Tanto todo lo que tenga que ver con la gestión del propio tiempo, de los tiempos de ejecución, de la organización de los equipos en los estudios, de la organización de las comunicaciones tanto internas como externas. La aplicación de la inteligencia artificial es fundamental. Y luego en la propia gestión del proyecto, ¿no? Todo lo que nos pueda ayudar la inteligencia artificial a gestionar todas las aplicaciones normativas, todas las aplicaciones tecnológicas que se vaya generando, digamos, esta especie de cuerpo inteligente dentro de cada estudio que vaya optimizando todos los procesos, pues es muy importante, ¿no? Y por último, pues también lo que tiene que ver con las cuestiones del resto de los agentes, ¿no? Tanto la promoción, que seamos capaces, ¿no?, de dar ese paso en el que los clientes nos puedan necesitar, ¿no? Que seamos como una especie de controladores de los indicadores, ¿no? Que cada estudio sea como pequeñas smart cities, ¿no? o smart offices, ¿no? en la que tengamos estas bases de datos y sepamos cómo controlar esto y no solo aportar diseño arquitectónico, sino aportar mucho más allá, ¿no? Y, por supuesto, en la construcción, con toda la prefabricación y toda la industrialización, que también seamos capaces de ser protagonistas en ello, en una, digamos, rama de nuestra profesión que estamos un poco en riesgo de perder el control, ¿no? Y que seamos meros prescriptores y entendemos que a través de la inteligencia artificial y el control de ella en estos procesos podemos también pasar a liderar, ¿no? Y nada más, esperando esta jornada y las jornadas venideras mañana y pasado también, y gracias al equipo y gracias a la escuela.
Muchas gracias, Andrés, muchas gracias, Pablo. Bueno, pues me toca dar la bienvenida a este Congreso AA, ¿no? Inteligencia Artificial, ¿no?, en Arquitectura. AA. Y es evidente que las iniciativas vienen de gente inquieta, comprometida, vienen de las personas. Y con los primeros que hablé, evidentemente, os lo digo para que lo sepáis, fueron Rodrigo y también Andrés, y gracias a esa inquietud, a esas ganas de aprender, de poder trabajar con las nuevas tecnologías, esto también tiene lugar. El compromiso que se ha generado con el colegio, con otras universidades, y la Universidad de Zúrich, el Politécnico de Cataluña, la Universidad Politécnica de Kazán, el Colegio Oficial de Arquitectos de Madrid, viene todo gracias a la iniciativa de personas inquietas y con ganas de aprender. Y digo también de aprender porque también tenemos aquí estudiantes que están terminando o iniciando incluso, pero sobre todo su formación, ya sea de grado, de máster o máster universitarios. Vamos a tener profesionales de la arquitectura, como es la otra pata en la que también se apoyará, ¿no?, a la que va dedicada estas jornadas. Entonces, desde la escuela, en nombre también del director, que no ha podido estar porque tiene otros compromisos, es daros a todos la bienvenida, esperar que disfrutemos todos de estas jornadas y que la escuela la tenéis abierta para poder no tener solo estas, sino otras venideras y poder en realidad obtener un grupo de trabajo, un nodo de trabajo, y que la inteligencia artificial, cuyo campo de aplicación lo estamos viendo poco a poco, pero jornadas de este tipo va a hacer que otros veamos dónde las podemos utilizar. Yo, como ha dicho Pablo, soy más de ver los scripts, los códigos de diseño paramétrico, que es un poco en lo que yo trabajo, y es donde más veo la inteligencia artificial, ¿no?, desde el punto de vista que yo suelo trabajar. Pero seguro que voy a descubrir otros encuentros, ¿no?, de la inteligencia artificial y la arquitectura, ¿no? Puede ser también en el propio diseño, como estaba hablando, quizás con algún compañero en temas de urbanismo. Es decir, yo creo que la jornada va a ser muy interesante, va a dar mucho de sí y sobre todo nos va a interrogar, ¿no? Nos va a interrogar sobre qué futuro inmediato tenemos delante con las nuevas tecnologías y cómo poderlas abordar. Así que, si os parece, voy a agradecer a los que van a participar de la mesa redonda de esta tarde. Bueno, y bueno, pues como tengo aquí la lista para no dejarme ninguno, en primer lugar, thank you, Mario Carpo. I know you are here with us. Also, of course, online, but we are with us. Thank you very much for your participation here. Tenemos también a Ciro Nagle, que está por ahí, que con el que estaba hablando antes, a Piera Chico, Enriqueta Llabres y Arantzazu Lazurraga. Muchas gracias por participar y también por todos los que no he citado que van a participar, que han participado esta mañana y en la jornada de mañana en el colegio. Muchas gracias.
Estupendo, un discurso profesional.
Voy a decir una pequeña cosa. Los que estáis aquí seguro que ya me habéis oído porque he ido de vocero por todas las clases. Me gusta que Paco haya hablado del título ¿no? Porque esta primera, esperemos que sea la primera parte de un programa que continúe, ¿no? Y que nos aleje un poco de que cuando hablamos de estos temas de interjecciones como ¿no? Y podamos llevar el mensaje un poco más lejos. Entonces, solamente una cosita más, ¿no? Hay una parte que es importante nombrar, que en el comité organizador somos de distintos grupos de investigación. Darío Negueruela, que es del grupo de investigación Digital Visual Studies de la Universidad de Zúrich, Lucía Jalón, que hoy no está con nosotros, que viene mañana, que es del grupo ALIS, del Politécnico de Lausanne, y Luis Ortega y a mí, que ya nos han nombrado más que de sobra, ¿no? Entonces, tiene que ver también con unos intereses de investigación en el área de proyectos y a darle una vuelta, ¿no?, a estas combinaciones de vocales. Entonces, nada más, os dejo con Arantzazu, que es la que va a moderar la mesa, y supongo que empezaremos con Mario y nada más.
Hola, buenas. Gracias también, bueno, de nuevo a todos, ¿no?, como Rodrigo, Lucía, que no está, pero estará mañana, a Darío, Luis también, que acabo de conocer. Y bueno, sobre todo también gracias a los ponentes de hoy, que vamos a tener con nosotros a Mario Carpo, que ya está conectado. Luego vamos a continuar con Enriqueta Llabres, haremos un pequeño descanso y luego, después del descanso, proseguirá Ciro Nagle. Y terminaremos con Piera. Bueno, terminaremos las ponencias, pero luego abriremos un debate en el que yo, pues nada, voy a estar aquí de moderadora dándoos la palabra, que me imagino que bueno, surgirán muchas cuestiones, ¿no? Y no sé, que me hace mucha ilusión, ¿no?, que esto se pueda hacer en una escuela y siempre es un placer volver a esta escuela y esperemos que esta mesa de nuevos instrumentos y nuevas pedagogías vaya muy bien, ¿no? Una cuestión práctica, los ponentes bueno, preferían hacer sus exposiciones en inglés, entonces a partir de aquí voy a continuar en inglés, pero luego, como probablemente Mario en algún momento se nos desconecte porque se va a China en unas horas, pues el resto que están aquí, bueno, entienden perfectamente el castellano, así que vamos, que hagáis las preguntas como buenamente queráis, ¿vale? Entonces, ahora sí vamos a poner a Mario. Y estará aquí, ¿vale?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Can you hear us, Mario?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'm going to introduce you, right?
I can see me several times on the same screen.
Oh, really? So we are like
But
duplicating.
in fact,
We can see you.
it's not important that you see me, it's important that you see my slides. So let me share the screen and let's see what happens.
Vale. Yeah, they're telling me that if you share your screen, this is not going to happen. Like the duplicating till the, yeah. So
You see a big white slide?
that's it.
Yes, that's my first slide, so you can go.
Perfect. Thank you. So Mario Carpo is the Rainer Baham Professor of Architectural History at the Bartlett, UCL in London, and an Emeritus Professor of Architectural Theory at the University of Applied Arts, Vienna, the Angewandte. His research and publications focus on the history of early modern architecture and on the theory and critique of contemporary design and technology. From 2002 to 2006, Mario Carpo served as head of study center at the Canadian Centre for Architecture. He was the Vincent Scully Visiting Professor of Architectural History at the Yale School of Architecture. Additionally, he has held prestigious roles such as Senior Scholar in Residence at the Getty Research Institute, Resident at the American Academy in Rome, and Guggenheim Fellow. His award-winning Architecture in the Age of Printing has been translated into several languages, and his most recent works include The Alphabet and the Algorithm, The Second Digital Term, Design Beyond Intelligence, and Beyond Digital Design and Automation at the End of Modernity, all published by the MIT Press. And today we'll be listening to a lecture titled Show Me Your Dataset, and I shall tell you who you are. The technical logic of generative AI is reviving a sense of historical precedent as an inevitable source of formal invention. For centuries, imitation was the foundation of the classical tradition in European art, yet it was effectively abandoned by 20th century modernism for many valid reasons. With the rise of generative AI, imitation is once again making its way into our design schools and the design professions. This compels us to relearn what imitation is, how it operates, its effects, and how we can approach it today in ways that are both critically reflective and creatively engaging. A phrase from Mario that stays with me is, every data set is a canon, every canon is a data set. If generative AI works, it is because someone somewhere has created a data set, selected a canon. However, its reference to precedent is influenced by preference, which, as we all know too well, can often reflect underlying prejudice. So please join me in welcoming Mario.
Thank you. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. Thank you for the introduction. You basically read already the core of my paper, so it could almost be over. You already said it all. But no, thanks for the organizers. Thanks, Aaron. I apologize. I cannot be with you in Madrid today, and I cannot even stay and attend the day in full. I also apologize because I'm speaking a foreign language, of course. But so, after all these apologies, I will also limit myself to a short, very general overview as a kind of introduction to this vast and urgent subject. As you know, as we all know, since the summer of 2022, everyone has been obsessed with generative AI. First, because nobody had seen it coming. I didn't, for example. So when it came, it was a surprise. Second, because some find it promising, some find it frightening. Never mind, but for the time being, generative AI can do practically amounts to not much. But before we even try to come to terms with what generative AI can do for or against the design professions, we must first try to explain or ascertain what kind of artificial intelligence we are talking about, because there are many artificial intelligences in the plural, often confused under the same name. Artificial intelligence has been around with that name as a branch of computer science since 1956, since the Dartmouth workshop on artificial intelligence, which is when the term was invented in the summer of 1956. Among the participants to that seminal workshop, there was Marvin Minsky, who 2 or 3 years later published a paper, which is still on the website, or was until recently, on the website of the MIT as a usable working paper, where Marvin Minsky provided a definition of artificial intelligence, which basically still holds good or held good almost to this day. Marvin Minsky says, or said, we are in 1960, that artificial intelligence is a general problem-solving machine based on heuristic programming and core search. Heuristic programming and core search means that the machine, a general problem-solving machine, basically solves problems by trial and error. The machine makes many trials, and since it is a machine which can make trials very fast, the expectation is that at some point, if the machine can make 1 billion random trials in 1 minute, give the machine 2 or 3 hours, and the machine will find not necessarily the best solution, but a good enough solution. That was the idea of artificial intelligence as it emerged in 1960-61. Since then, the discipline has already risen and fallen and reinvented itself many times. Artificial intelligence was very popular in the 60s, including among architects. And many in our profession may remember this groundbreaking book by a very young Nicolas Negroponte, first published in 1970. This was the time when many thought that computers could do almost everything. In this book, famously, Nicolas Negroponte described a machine that would basically replace the architect. The machine didn't work, but the expectation was that at some point the machine would work and replace the architect in full. Well, that was 1970. Later in the 70s, it appeared that, in fact, computers of that time, due to their technical limitation, could do, in fact, little more than nothing. So both cybernetics, which was the new discipline of control and communication in the animal and the machine, which Norbert Wiener had just invented out of nothing in 1948, which partly overlapped with early computer science. So both cybernetics and artificial intelligence itself were quickly forgotten, relegated to the dustbin of technical history and of design history. This period is called the winter of artificial intelligence, when artificial intelligence was basically discarded and nobody mentioned it anymore. This was basically the late 70s and the early 80s, or the 80s. Now, the digital turn that, as we all know, has changed the history of architecture, starting from the early 90s. You know some of the consequences of that. The digital turn in architecture, was driven by small computers we use as drawing machines, not by big computers used as thinking machines. Computers in the 90s, as the computer used to build this one, inaugurated in the fall of 1997, these computers made drawings, including some very special kind of drawings we could not have drawn without computers. But in the 90s, nobody even tried to use computers to solve design problems. So these computers, the computers that have driven the digital turn in the 90s, were not general problem-solving machines. They were drawing machines. They were not thinking machines. They were practical design tools or drawing tools. They came out of engineering. They were based on spline modeling, which was developed not by cyberneticians or by scientists of artificial intelligence. The technology which we use to make this was developed by engineers working for the automobile, the car industries, and the airplane industries. Famously, the software which made this building possible was developed by an aircraft company, Dassault, in Paris, to design the wings of a plane. We all know the story. So these had nothing to do with artificial intelligence. It had everything to do with computers as drawing tools, not thinking tools, but drawing machines. Now, things are changing again now, because artificial intelligence, as in the 60s, as a general problem-solving machine, is back. And unlike what happened in the 60s, today it more or less works. The recent revival of artificial intelligence as a general problem-solving machines came from a branch of computer science that had been already tested in the 60s and abandoned in the 70s, based on so-called neural networks. This mode of computation used to be called connectionist back then in the 60s, and today it is better known as machine learning. Building on that, the second coming, the resurrection of artificial intelligence in the visual arts, after the first epiphany in the 60s, is due to a new kind of neural networks called generative adversarial networks, or GANs, which it emerged are very good at processing images. GANs, and style GANs in particular, were invented in 2014, 2015, 2016. These are the articles which launched them, and have been used by artists and designers since around 2018. However, the recent hullabaloo on generative AI is due to the, as we all know, to the release of new user-friendly text-to-image applications, such as Midjourney or DALL-E by OpenAI. This came out in the spring and summer of 2022. And of course, everyone has been obsessed with generative AI since the release of ChatGPT almost exactly 2 years ago to the day. Old GANs, generative adversarial networks, which artists and designers have been using for almost 10 years, and today's generative AI, which is what everyone is talking about now, they are based on a similar technical logic. And this is why it may be interesting for us in the design professions to make certain that we understand the spirit of the game, to find out what these technologies can do, and what we can and what we cannot do when we use them. The technical logic of generative AI and GANs is by now well known, and I presume it is familiar to everyone in the audience. GAN artists must first of all gather a corpus of related images that are pertinent to the project. This corpus, which is called a data set, is fed into the machine learning algorithms that tries to find out what these images have in common, and then formalizes their commonalities. The result of this inductive process is a mathematical matrix that computer scientists call a latent space. I always have to explain to my students that this latent space is just a technical term. It's not a space, and it's not particularly latent. We don't know why they call it that way. They could have called it XYZ 392/5, and it would still work the same. The title, the name they chose, it can even be a bit misleading. It's nothing to do with space. It roughly corresponds to what philosophers would call the definition, the idea, the formula, the quintessence of the original data set. So, for example, if we feed the system a data set of images of dogs, like this one, the latent space will be the definition of an ideal dog, the formalization of a quintessential dog, a super dog, the Platonic idea of dog, the definition of dog of the ideal dog in the mind of God. This definition, which today is not verbal or visual, as it would have been in the Renaissance, for example, but it is mathematical, can in turn be applied to different tasks. Task number 1, analytic. We show the system a new picture and we ask, is this a dog? So show this and we ask, is this a dog? I don't know who made this image, but it's to cheat the system, and the system probably answers 45% it's a dog, but no more than that, because it doesn't really look like a dog. It's the nose of the dog, but the rest you cannot see it. Task number 1. Task number 2, generative. Ask the system to produce realistic images of dogs that do not exist, or fake dog. These are dogs. There's a competition for fake dogs. These dogs do not exist, but they imitate the dogs which have been assembled in the dataset. Here, the system is imitating the dataset we have fed into it. And then, task number 3, combinatory, asking the system to merge 2 or more datasets in given proportions, producing, for example, in this case, a merger of 2 datasets, the dog and the coyote, in different percent. So at the left, it's 80% dog and 20% coyote, and then you shift the percent, it becomes more and more coyote and less dog, and the one at the right-hand side of the screen is 80% coyote, as you see, it looks like a coyote, and 20% dog, merging 2 datasets. Now, there is an interesting variation of this combinatory mode, where generative algorithms are asked to apply some general aspects of a dataset, not to a set, but to a single individual, transforming this individual into a new one, which still looks similar to the exemplar from which it derives, but at the same time shows features of the dataset to which it is being assimilated. Now, the general traits that define a visual set, and are common to all its individuals, but pertain to none in particular, are similar to what Western classical artists, starting in the Renaissance, used to call a manner, or in the 19th century, a style. Not surprisingly, the computer scientists who introduced these processes of transformation and assimilation between an individual and a set started to call this operation style transfer. The term has stuck, and it is now in current use, neural style transfer. This is an example which I've already shown many times. It's not a dog this time, I've chosen a cat. Not a fake cat, this is a real cat. I know him well. It's called Robin. So you choose the cat, a real cat, then you choose a style image. In this case, we chose a style, the style of neoplasticism, which was invented by Piet Mondrian and his friends. The movement was called the stijl, which in Dutch means the style. And so you merge the two, and what you obtain on the right is Robin as Piet Mondrian would have painted him in neoplastic style in Amsterdam around 1925. Style transfer. Now, the wave of generative AI that has swept the planet since the spring of 2022 has not significantly changed this conceptual framework, except that the new chatbots meant for the general public are not based on specific datasets, purpose-built dataset we make for a specific project, but use huge and generic archives of labeled images, text and image couples or pairs. They say scraped from the internet, whereby they mean stolen from the internet. And these big datasets are called large language models, or LLM. Evidently, due to their provenance, due to where they come from, meaning from the public internet, large language models can only reflect what the internet has already gathered. Crossed cross-modal image generators based on large language models function by the retrieval, the aggregation, and the averaging of precedent. And as the precedent from which they derive is a crowdsourced collection of images, generative AI in this instance, used this way, is a machine that automates the imitation of visual commonplaces. For example, if I type the prompt Switzerland into DALL-E, this is what I get. Or I did when I tried, 1 year ago. But this is, in fact, an automated visual opinion poll. It's not a picture of something which really exists, evidently. This is what Switzerland looks like in the mind of most people. The system has retrieved 1 million images with the label of Switzerland, and it made a merger of all of them, and the synoptic rendering of all what these images have in common is what you see. This is an opinion poll. This is what most people think Switzerland should look like. Now, what practical use can this have? If you are the Swiss tourist office and you want to redesign your website, this is useful. If you work in marketing and you have to design a new box for Swiss chocolate, this is useful. If you are a designer, this is probably perfectly useless. But this is the wisdom of crowds, the opinion of most, translated into one synthetic picture that is in turn dependent in full and exclusively on the data set from which it derives. But let's bear that in mind. This is not image generation. This is an automated opinion poll. What is of capital interest to designers, instead, is the potential of a machine which has at long last acquired a capacity to successfully automate imitation, regardless of the way the original dataset has been put together for a specific project, custom-made or huge and generic. Generative, that would be the large language model, generative AI can produce new images that are similar to, but different from, all the images in the original dataset. Generative AI imitates the dataset it was trained on, meaning the dataset we fed into it. Until recently, creative imitation was a privilege of the human mind, or seen as such. No longer. This is a major technical breakthrough, one with vast epistemological, philosophical, and scientific implications. The automation of creative imitation. A machine that can imitate, much as humans would have done or would do. But what's the use of this technology in design? Do today's designers need a machine to imitate a model, or a set of models, or some abstract features common to an entire set of models, for example, to imitate an artistic style, as in the example of the cat, which I have shown? Which designers would need someone else's intelligence, never mind the artificial, to imitate someone else's style, or even their own style? Yet, oddly, many designers right now, including some we know, are doing just that right now. And there may even be a certain logic in it, because this is what AI does. This is the way artificial intelligence works, and this should give us pause and make us think. Generative AI does not create images out of thin air. It doesn't create, in fact, it generates. It imitates a carefully curated dataset of images we have fed into the machine, and generates new images based on some criteria or parameters of imitation we have chosen. Now, is this not what human intelligence always did and still does? Artificial intelligence is here to remind us that there is no creation without imitation, no invention without convention, no design without a tradition, no expression without a language, no project without a source it derives from. Artificial intelligence is here to remind us that the first step of each creative process is the awareness, then the acknowledgement of precedent, of a precedent we relate to, never mind that we like it or not. Every data set is a canon, and every canon is a data set, and every data set is a collection of models which someone at some point mapped and put together. Never mind the technology we are using. Every canon is by definition exclusionary. It's based on exclusion because when we put something in, necessarily we kick something out, which also means that every time we put something in, we kick someone out. We may not like that, but that's the way it is. And it always was, long before the invention of generative AI. And today, generative AI is here to remind us that the first step in every creative process is the election and selection of a data set, and that there can be no creation without some precedent of reference and without some reference to precedent. Precedent is that canon of our own choosing that gives meaning to our voice, for better or worse. Again, many would argue that many cognitive theories and many art theories, Western and not Western, have always said the same. And that is true, but with a difference. Humans can be unaware of the sources of their inspiration. They often are. Humans can also forget or even deliberately hide or obfuscate the references, meaning the histories, the tradition, the convention to which they refer, which they have in mind. In short, humans can be dumb or cheat, whereas generative AI is brutally transparent. Art created with AI always starts with a data set, and that data set is always there for all eyes to see. There can be no anxiety of influence when we design with AI. Show me your data set, and I shall tell you who you are. Now, as a design critic, I do not necessarily embrace this transparency, but I am glad that the rise of generative AI is forcing us to confront, once again, the role of precedent, meaning of tradition and history, in all creative and artistic endeavors. This is, in my opinion, the main contribution of generative AI to contemporary design and to design theory. But, to conclude, let me also tell you that here now, in this time and place, we in the design profession, collectively, well, you know what? Just right now, we may have bigger fish to fry. Thank you. This is my last word for today. And now I can stay online for some while, but at some point I have to go. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mario, and well, you're welcome to stay as long as you can. And
I
thanks.
stay a little more, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, like the importance of the president, I think we will come back to that for sure. I put the poster. So now we're gonna continue with Enriqueta, and Enriqueta Jabres-Valls is an architect with a master's in local economic development from the London School of Economics. In 2009, she founded Relational Urbanism, experimental research-based practice in London, and 2012, she won the Aru Global Challenge, and among the numerous Accolades of Relational Urbanism are the third prize for Seosun Park in South Korea and the first prize for Lefanus Skate and Play Park in Dublin. Enriqueta Jabres led the Associative Urbanist program at the Verlag Institute in the Netherlands, and she taught in the Department of Landscape Architecture at Harvard GST. Since 2012, she has been leading the Urban Design Research Cluster 18, Fab Media Urbanism, alongside Zach Fluker. Don't know if that's right, Fluker. As part of the Bartlett B-Pro program at University College London. And Relational Urbanism Research and its contribution to architecture and urban design have been widely published, and its experimental work continues to thrive under the umbrella of Jabres Taponi Architects as Relational Urbanism Lab. And today her lecture is entitled Relational Urbanism from the Molecular to the Planetary. I think it will go into another scale now, like territorial scale. And this presentation explores relational urbanism from the molecular to the planetary, which is a research cluster, if I'm not wrong, at the Bartlett School of Architecture, focused on the role of AI in reshaping urban and architectural practices. And by integrating advanced technologies, relational urbanism analyze how cities influence broader ecosystems that extend beyond their physical boundaries. And employing tools such as Copernicus, land monitoring data, the cluster tackles challenges such as urban ecological footprints, which extend over areas far greater than the cities themselves. And through a multi-scalar approach, relational urbanism redefines the role of architecture within both urban and planetary contexts, blending research with practical implementation. So we'll see some practice now to anticipate future changes in our field. So let us all give a warm welcome to Enriqueta.
No, but that's not the first slide. Yeah.
You fine?
I think so. Okay. Hello. Good afternoon. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for the invitation, Rodrigo and all the team, and I'm very happy to be here. Let me see if this works like this. So the work that I'm going to present today, I think it will come in a minute. It's the work that I have been developing in Research Cluster 18 for the last 10 years. Basically, it focuses on understanding how the contemporary geography is reshaping goods, people, and resources, and how this brings new challenges, basically environmental and ecological challenges. And I focus mainly on the great acceleration and elements of the Earth system science. So Earth system science was brought by NASA in 1990s and tried to understand global ecosystems, the carbon, the nitrogen, and how it's creating environmental problems around the world. So basically, our clusters, what tries to do is to see how the urban culture is influencing these environmental challenges, and particularly looking at the idea of planetary urbanization. So how we cannot discontinue these cities from the operational landscapes that actually feed the cities and also process all the waste in the cities. So this is an image of NASA, Earth System Science, and I'm going to present some of the work that we have been doing for the last 10 years, but basically through a series of questions and how we bring data sets and how we bring generative AI and use these data sets to answer and to address these questions. So one is how can we create iconic urban spaces that elevate air system science in architecture and urban culture. And this has to do with the biochemical cycles. So basically, well, we all know the problem of the global carbon. So, but actually the global carbon is just one example of the disruption of the biochemical cycles that we are processing in the planet. We have the phosphorus cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and basically through the reconfiguration of these materials and how we are processing through urbanization, are creating massive disruptions at the planetary scale, and basically is making the planet more inhabitable. So our cluster really look at the GIS data, global data, and then it tries to process this data and formulate design research questions that help us to understand how architecture and how the fabric of the city could be redefined. One of the problems is the monoculture, and here this project is about rice. 1 year we addressed the idea of monoculture in food and the production of wheat, rice, soya bean, and we try to see how can we use, in this case it was cycle gun, to create new landscapes in which we could understand how the rice could be cultivated and understand the patterns of cultivation of rice. So in here you see the development of the project. This is a project that actually developed by the practice, and in this case we also focus on the idea of what kind of iconic images bring the integration of ecology in the city, and in this case we use another type of AI algorithm, though some people say it's or not. This is an evolutionary learning algorithm in which we basically try to question whether the architecture can accommodate a multifunction approach to the idea of the provision of ecological services. So this was done for the design and generation of a roof, and it was presented in the Beijing Design Biennale in 2018. It was awarded with the Innovation Prize Award at that time. So basically, the way evolutionary learning algorithms work is that you have multiple conditions that it's basically mimicking the idea of evolution, and basically an evolution, you have different conditions in which an element can adapt, and each condition will lead you to a way to succeed in a specific environment. So we use this kind of logics in order to design the project. So yeah, the idea is what kind of spaces and what kind of spatial languages you will create when an algorithm brings this logic into the space. This image is an image from the Copernicus data set. So when I was in Wuppertal University in 2019, something like this, I had a professorship there, and I was studying changes in the soil. So basically in here, I don't know, you can see London, you can see Düsseldorf, you can see the Netherlands, and the red dots is the imperviousness layer. So basically all these red dots that you see in the map are areas in the map in which the soil has lost permeability. That means that when it rains, it cannot filtrate. So I put this map into the board because I want to challenge what architecture should provide and what is the definition of the domain of the architecture. Of course, if you zoom in, each single dot is an architectural project, but when you zoom out, you see what this individual thinking and this confined thinking is creating at the larger scale. Of course, the European Union monitors imperviousness very closely because it creates flooding. So basically, but not only that, the soil loses the capacity to comply with its role, which is more extensive. You can see it, for example, from the description of entangled life from Merlin Sheldrake. So basically, it's not only the filtration, it's how plants and basically the forest layer communicates through the soil. So, so we have done quite extensive work on how can we redesign the public space and how can we understand the connection between trees in order to create alternative public spaces. So this project, Trees as an Infrastructure, look at this definition of what forests do through the different layers from the canopy until the subsoil, and then uses also machine learning in order to analyze what are the conditions that you could find in London, and also coupling two types of data sets. One is the forestry layer and the other is the urban heat island effect. So so basically I mean, the idea is how can we use these data sets to create different patterns, and how these patterns could bring certain logic that, of course, it's somehow not understandable at the human eye. I like the quote that Mario Carpo brought from Nicolas Negroponte, and actually in his readings he said that humans are very good at their own scale, but they are very bad when you go to the larger scale from the human and to the smaller scale. So in here you have some generative models of like how you could redesign an urban street in Camden. Another model that we work, this architecture, tried to speculate how could we turn the idea of a productive city into a vertical city, and how can we bring production into the city. And that is because if you look at the amount of arable land that we are using in the planet is unsustainable. So basically cities have a huge urban footprint, and we basically are there is very little land that is now for biodiversity. So in here we did some speculations on some generative models for having vertical agriculture. So basically creating urban farming. And one thing that we started to create is our own data sets in which we could have a modeling that will reprogram the city. We took we created a data set of past architectural plans in which they accommodated plants in the architecture, and we use it as a generative model to integrate. So the idea that architecture could be reprogram itself, and these kind of models could eventually give you an idea of how this architecture could be reprogrammed. And another example that I want to bring today is the idea of what defines urban culture and what does architecture fit within it. And it is basically based on the critique that urban culture is basically based on spaces for consumption and for entertainment. And actually part of the environmental crisis that we have today is that all the territories that supplies our living and process our waste are far away from us, and we are actually not connected to them. So we did this speculative project in which we questioned what should be the brief of an architectural practice and what type of architectures are not including in the architectural discourse, and maybe we are complicit on a cultural failure of addressing environmental degradation. So we speculated what a recycling plant should be. Actually, recycling plants are architectures in the city, but are hidden architectures in the city, so nobody goes on a Saturday to recycle. No? It's like all our cultural activities are based on consumption. And this creates inequalities, global inequalities, places that will receive a lot of migration. Actually, we send a lot of rubbish to these places, but we don't see it. And in here, we try to use, in this case, cycle gun to try to speculate how can we start to glitch data sets and make combinations of programs of architecture. So this is a data set that is glitch. A glitch means it's a mistake in the data set. So we started to combine shopping malls with recycling centers, and we pair these data sets, and we let the GAN model to tell us what a cultural center in which the recycling program is merged within it, how it will look like. So it is a bit of the idea that, of course, the previous projects that you saw were more like GIS data and trying to see patterns in the built environment, but this one is a little bit more speculative, trying to just play a little bit with the design. And we use the brutalist architecture. We merge it with also with the recycling centers, and we created these data sets that then will give us this design. So this is what it's saying here. So basically we try to pair the program of the two architectures and also the appearance, and yeah. So I think something that we have done in the cluster extensively is to try to see how this tools like lead us to different design research questions, and we try to go underneath of the AI tools, and we always try to train them in a specific way in order to just explore what these tools could lead us. Yeah. So in here you are seeing how we pair the two data sets. We try to create similarities, and we glitch them. And in here, actually, we try to distribute. So the model is distributing it and creating a mix of a shopping mall and a recycling center, which I think it should happen, because if we don't include recycling in our daily life a little bit more joyful, I mean, there are some places in the world we don't visit that they are full of our rubbish, I mean, which we also study. And this is what we did with the two data sets, the Brutalist and the Recycling Center. Yeah. At that time, I went to Switzerland as well. Jeffrey Wang was doing this idea of Swissness, what Swissness is, and we exchanged ideas about that. Yeah. I mean, this idea of glitching for me is very interesting. And in here you have some examples of the views of this. So what and like a cultural space for recycling could look like. Okay, that could be distributed. So this is another project that I'm going to show. It's the last one, 5 more minutes. So basically, the idea of participation and bringing ownership to the project, and how can we extend ownership in the design process, is something that is also it interests us. And in here we play with the idea of collective intelligence and participatory models, and we look at how AI could help reimagine collaboration and knowledge sharing in architecture and urban design. So this project, Memory Holder, is a project that I like very much. It's basically based on heritage. And the gas holders are a piece of infrastructure from the 19th century. So basically they used to store the gas, the city gas. But now they are under use, and the RIBA has an agenda of what to do with it. And we had a speculation that maybe the city could have a voice on what to do with it. And in this project, the student, he did, well, he scraped the data from Instagram of what people say and post when they see a gas holder. So he created this website, categorized the data set, and then started to play with the images, the channels, and created a project in which actually it's like a screen in which the gas holder could continuously be redesigned, and the model could continuously play these images, but also associate the images with particular hashtags and names that the people will say about it. So in this case, a lot of a name that came about a lot was sunset. I don't know why, but it's interesting to see. So I'm finishing. So basically, exploring AI pushes us to question the nature of knowledge, which is something that I am very interested in, and I read a lot about it. I've been a little bit more showing the use of GIS data and integrating geography, but Other lectures are more about what type of knowledge creation process do we engage, from tacit, codified, and what AI brings into the table. For me, it brings an understanding of processes that are at the very large scale and at the very molecular scale. And this amplifies our cognition and our creative space. And at the end, reframing the creative space is part of how can we expand our creative processes. So I live, this was the first project this was in 2018, and it was the first project in which we started to play with AI. Actually, here, this is just a dimensionality reduction, and we did just, we were thinking about what is the idea of intelligence. So what types of intelligence we have to bring into the table when we are looking at the urban environment. And this was a very brilliant student that actually started to use the dimensionality reduction in point cloud segmentation. So I just leave it as a close remark. I think it's very beautiful as well. So thank you very much. And
well, thank you so much, Enriqueta. And yeah, we've seen how we can use this kind of techniques for land monitoring services, and in order to, for example, improve the permeability, which is, we have learned like recently how important it is in our cities. And also thank you for your questions, because I think there are there are questions that we should ask ourselves. And we have also seen like the importance of building our own data sets in a creative way. So now we'll make a small break, if I'm not wrong. 10 minutes, that's it. Okay, so you've got some coffee outside, and we'll be back with Ciro and Piera. Yeah, 10 minutes. Lo vea mejor. Well, we will continue with Ciro's lecture. And so Ciro Nagle is currently research professor of the Escuela de Arquitectura y Estudios Urbanos, Universidad Torcuato Di Tella. And he has been dean of the Escuela de Arquitectura y Estudios Urbanos in this school, and previously visiting professor at Harvard GSD, Diploma Unit Master, and director of the Landscape Urbanism Graduate Design Program at the Architectural Association School of Architecture, and visiting professor at Cornell University, Columbia University, de Berlage, the Universidad Federico Santa María Valparaíso, and Universidad de Buenos Aires. He's director of GDB, General Design Bureau, which is an office of design and research of architectural organizational models, and author of several books, one of them which is the, well, I'll mention all of them. Generic Sublime, Organizational Models for Global Architecture, and the Atlas of Rural Protocols of the American Midwest Argentine Pampas with Juiz. And his publications include, well, books, but also introductions, critical essays, and so on. And his projects, theoretical production, academic work, and design research engage the potentials that result of the convergence of digital culture, ecological thinking, and complexity theory in architecture at the age of globalization, developing design methodologies and contributing to speculate and theorize the disciplinary transformations derived from them regarding material culture and the generation of organizational models. And today, he will tell us about architecture hyperculture. So we've got this huge overflow of images which project once more a notion that nothing can be truly meaningful. AI has the capacity to simultaneously produce both everything and nothing, Ciro says, and stands as the ultimate machine for the proliferation of nonsense, of whateverness. But instead of meeting this phenomenon with skepticism, Ciro's presentation suggests that the architectural process can generate an unprecedented array of elemental projects from historical images when these are treated as threats for extemporaneously navigating the depths of a, again, database canon. They can be blended with other historical materials, and other paths will appear, will be recognized, and will be constructed as prompts. So the resulting objects will be, again, conceptualized, and they will evolve into strangely familiar entities within the world. Thus, the spectrum of architectural culture is wildly expanded as it redefines its status as a hyperculture, as he says. So I invite you again all to welcome Ciro.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first time in the school. I heard so many things about the school for such a long time, but I had never been here, strangely enough. So I'm very happy to know at least the space and some people here. Just as a caveat, I want to say that I'm a newcomer to artificial intelligence in the way I am dealing with it. And not only that, but also, so I've been working on what I'm going to show for 2 years, so it's quite recent. And not only that, but also what I'm going to show has the kind of the ethics and the aesthetics. No, the ethics of what I have been doing for a long time, but the aesthetics and in a way the kind of approach, that is actually the opposite of what I have been doing for a long time, and partly that's the reason why I'm doing it, to contradict my previous work at a time that I think when I think that becomes important. So start with this quote by Picasso, which you may already know, maybe not in English, which says, "I do not seek, I find. To seek is to depart from known facts, willing to discover something known within the new. To find, that is what is totally new, even in movement. All paths are open, and what is found is something completely unknown. It is a risk, a sacred adventure. The uncertainty of such risk can only be assumed by those who feel at ease and protected when in a state of absolute exposure. Those who feel steered while being confused. Those who in obscurity can abandon themselves to an invisible star and feel attracted by their destiny, instead of fixing it through human limitations. That aperture to new knowledge, to all new interior and exterior experience, that is the essence of modern human being, who, despite the fear of being carried away, experiences the grace of being paradoxically protected by the manifestation of new possibilities." I will read a little bit now. "Suddenly, artificial intelligence has become public matter, as if fell from the sky, generating a commotion that we still do not know what form it will take, probably that of an altogether new naturalization of technology, a new state of things that is once again rapidly absorbed and turned into a common resource, made available at every device or application, both sinister and accessible, generic and specific, potent and trivial, tailored but impersonal, opaque and transparent, amicable and repugnant, fascinating and terrifying. Artificial intelligence has become a theme and a métier of everybody in equal measure. My mother uses it without knowing what it is about. My father constantly speaks of it. Children play with it unconsciously. Its ubiquity entertains everybody inside its hazy black box. An intelligible overflow of images that falsely projects, once again, the idea that nothing can be any more truly new, nor that it can be truly meaningful. Artificial intelligence is capable nowadays to simultaneously produce everything and nothing. Prolific and inscrutable, it is the ultimate machine of proliferation of nonsense, the newest form of production of whateverness. In other words, partly the reason why I'm interested in artificial intelligence today is because it is simply popular. Popular in a world where globalization has become a populist phenomenon. Popular as a problem. Yet rather than confronting this nonsensicality with skepticism, the challenge is to embrace the renewed promise of its broader spectrum of sense. Like with any advanced technology that puts in crisis the status quo of the disciplines, we must investigate today with rigorous passion the renewed capabilities that artificial intelligence brings on the table of architecture culture in the form of being able to produce quickly instantaneous forms of culture through the most uncontrollable proliferation of images. The wildest forms involved in their configuration and the most naturalized routines that are already present in their consumption. Using as a database and promiscuously mixing the most manifest canonical work of the 100 most influential of the architects of the past 5 centuries as a common platform, from Alberti to Koolhaas, the investigation extemporaneously navigates the historical sea of architecture, thinking by design, attentively but openly, and following its potential becoming. The artificial intelligence is capable, in that context, to overload the canon without pleading, celebrating, or honoring its orthodoxy, but seriously playing across a spectrum of meanings and implications, identifying genius, formulating ideas, and building new forms of sense. For this, the status of the architectural procedure radically shifts and passes to operate within an ethics that can be regarded as an ongoing, continuous, ever-present brainstorming process, the methodology of which is key to determine and formally structure, circumventing self-indulgent, naive, and floppy subjective approximations, and providing its sense of new forms of cultural weight, overcoming the scenario that we see nowadays commonly of increasingly generating irrelevant noise, white noise. In other words, I'm interested in how to turn this white noise, this omnipresent noise, into some kind of music, not from outside, not against it, but from within it. In this AI version, what I will show proposes that the architectural procedure can produce an unprecedented myriad of candid elemental projects out of historical architectural materials when they are treated as the threads to navigate into the depth of a database canon. Promiscuously blended with other historical materials, divergent directions are, in a non-sequential order, intuited, recognized, hypothesized, turned into systematic instructions, and built as prompts. And so are their objects distilled, sharpened, synthesized, and figured, and their concepts nurtured and rationalized, until they become oddly familiar beings in the world, standing on their feet, yet dancing over the quicksand of extreme availability. The spectrum of architecture culture is thus wildly expanded as it redefines itself and its status as a hyperculture. So the investigation I'm going to show is set in this context, on the one hand, as a material platform that nurtures and is nurtured by individual investigations, and on the other, as a series of steps that, while set in advance as a linear procedure, are open to feedback from the nuanced routines of the creative process. The investigation is thus planned as a research tank that unfolds in time across academic institutions and levels of education. The medium of the process is constituted by an image of a precedent, in principle a front view or facade of a built or unbuilt project from the past 5 centuries in the Western tradition, recognizing organizational deviances, activating new organizations, and transfiguring new architectonic values. The pedagogy is based on the learning of an architectural organization through the analysis of images against superficial approximations to form, launching an open yet rigorous notion of the discipline. So this is the material I set up as a point of departure, as a platform of work. It includes work from Alberti to, as I said, Koolhaas, or actually up to FOA and RUR architects, and going through Baroque, Neoclassicism, Romantic architecture, pre-modern architecture, modern international style, Tardo-modernism, postmodernism, and complexity theory-related projects. At each of these, for each of these architects, this is a set of, at the moment, 90 architects. For each of these architects, we are building an archive of projects, and we are setting priorities, canonical priorities, which operate as both friends and enemies of the work, or let's say, material that we want to, at the same time, respect and challenge. For each architect, there is a selection of buildings, which is classified in terms of their canonical status, so to speak. And then from those buildings, we are building an archive of images, mostly frontal images, front facades. In some cases, that is not really consistent with the project, so we work with planimetric views or corner views. But generally speaking, we are working with the image of the project, with the face of the project. So, Eisenman, Koolhaas, Schumi, Testa, Miralles, etc. No? You probably recognize most of these. And finally, these ones. So we set up this material as a point of departure, and we developed a sort of procedure that consists in a series of steps, linearly unfolding, but actually working back and forth. The first condition is to recognize the architecture of the author and its kind of constant patterns. The second is to describe the project itself and its general organizational characteristics. The third one is to make a description of the most obviously representative image of that building. And then out of that description, construct what we call a breakdown of that description, in which the description is broken down into a series of systems, groups of elements, and attributes of those elements. It is those attributes, the ones that the work is going to engage with and differentiate. So in that context, each of the investigations produces a certain hypothesis, and the hypothesis being the opening of those attributes into a sort of regime of variation. Out of that hypothesis that is based on those attributes, there is a sort of prediction of how those attributes are going to change out of the relationship between that particular image of that particular project and single images of each of the other 90 projects. So this pattern registers the probability of producing a meaningful transformation of the initial image by means of the influence of the other. The second moment in the work, which is to a large extent operative to the first stage of the work, has to do with running blend operations, mixing images of the same kind or of a similar kind, if not, that are downloaded from the web and that have as much as possible, and that have no editing at all, and that have as much as possible points of view, framings that are concentrating on a similar situation. Those blends produce a series of hybridizations between the two. This is done, so to speak, with the 90 other projects. And in those blends, there is a sort of process of recognition of tendencies that are more or less relevant to the initial hypothesis. Then out of the selection of the most interesting instance of hybridization, there are a series of steps that have to do with the rationalization of that and the conceptualization of that. And that series of steps go through a process of reconstruction, in which the same procedure of blending that happens within the black box of Midjourney then is sort of assisted and reinforced by a prompt that is constructed on the basis of the hypothesis, and that instigates basically a similar tendency to what is produced by the blend. That process of construction of a prompt has to do with the breakdown that I was showing before, and then it produces each time a new series of images that are progressively closer to the desired or supposedly desired aim. So each of these, of the horizontal lines, is a moment in that process of prompt construction. The prompt gets progressively specific, progressively indexing the characteristics that are stipulated in the attribute, in the breakdown of attributes, and then produce a new image that is close but not really the same as the blend production. Then there is a second moment that has to do with intensification, in which the same process of prompts construction intensifies certain characteristics and takes those into extremes with a similar procedure, but now not just in favor of reconstructing the same image, but in favor of intensifying its properties. A third moment is the moment of incorporation, in which by incorporating new elements or new attributes in the description of those images by means of prompts, there is a sort of intensification, but it's not an intensification that happens from within what happens, but actually from without. And that produces a new project. And then the last one is the moment of integration, in which these previous instances are integrated into a more complex prompt that at the same time reconstructs, intensifies, and incorporates. And that produces a project that is the result of a constant process of deviation. What is interesting is not really only the result of the process, but actually all the instances in the process itself. And then there is a form of evaluation that basically recognizes the success or failure of the prediction set in advance. With that same procedure happening not only happening on the basis of one particular image of one particular project with another, that is done across the spectrum of the 90 other canons or canonical works or images of canonical works, and then that spectrum produces what we think of as a family of diversifications of the initial material. In that family, that family constructs not only is the result not only of individually interesting or meaningful ideas, meaningful in the sense of their relevance to the preconditions, but also it produces a diversification of that. And therefore it operates as if it was branching out one single material that makes manifest a certain canon into a whole array of diversification or versions of that. So I will just show one work. I have 3 works, but I think I have time only for one. It's a work of one of the students that we had in one of the schools, and it's done on the basis of Gio Ponti's work. First, characterizing the architecture of Gio-Ponti as an architecture that constructs what he calls finite form. The ambiguity of the word finite is interesting because it's at the same time the opposite of infinite. It's defined. At the same time, it has the connotation of finesse and also of thinness. So I think that kind of multiplicitous reading of the idea of finite is embedded the work says that it's embedded in the work of Gio-Ponti and develops a sort of description of this particular project according to that kind of general reading of finiteness. So the breakdown consists of a series of readings of that particular facade that break down the facade into a series of in principle, hierarchically related organizational readings of the facade, going from the reading of the facade as a volume with a single dome, a single flat dome, then as a long pitch rooftop, then as a rectangular curved facade plane, then as a facade with sharp edges that constructed this flat volume, then as a series of vertical fluting and secondary horizontal striations, then as a sort of quasi-random pattern of windows or openings, and finally as a sharp edge shaped series of shaped windows. The hypothesis creates a polemics in relation to those characteristics, trying to configure, or more than a polemic, I would say a kind of a challenge of diversifying those characteristics and taking them to certain frontiers. For example, configuring idiosyncratic domes, expanding the repertoires of rooftops, complexifying the curvature of the facade planes, radicalizing the acuteness of the corners and the sharpness of edges, diversifying the vertical fluting rhythms intertwined with horizontal striations, broadening the spectrum of density and size of window patterns, or diversifying and multiplying the sharp edge shaped windows. So under that hypothesis, the project runs this series of blends, like I was showing before in the procedure, with the other architectures that I was showing at the beginning. So from Brunelleschi, Alberti, Michelangelo, Palladio, Giulio Romano, etc., no? Bernini, Borromini, Guarini, and so on. No? Produces a sort of process of blending and selection that selects those new facades that take those attributes, those hypothesized actions to those attributes to extremes. This is done several times. It's not, here I'm showing only 4 options, but it's done several times until the selection process is produced. And in different occasions, they produce more or less successful results. Successful being relevant and extreme in relation to the pattern of the hypothesis. We'll go through that now again, so I'll go through it quickly. The second stage is the construction of the prompt. And in the construction of the prompt, there is this process in which there is the production of a series of facades that, as I was showing before, approximate progressively to the blend facade. And in that process of approximation, there are outcomes that are sometimes freaky or sort of displaced laterally from the original hypothesis and probably interesting. And in those cases, the hypothesis sometimes is redefined according to the encounters. Other than that, the idea is that the process of prompt construction aims at producing something as similar as possible as the blend. So in that sense, there is a sort of idealization of the blend, and there is a sort of, which ends up operating as an aim, as a desire. But at the same time, in the pursuit of that desire, there is also the encountering of new versions that are sometimes more interesting and sometimes feedback the hypothesis of the process. So in that sense, the idea of hypothesis that the work deals with is not really a scientific hypothesis in the sort of positivistic sense. So it's not trying to demonstrate something, it's not trying to achieve something, it's trying to use the process of trying to achieve something into a process of achieving something else. So that's some of the examples with some of the architectures that I was showing before. Partly what we are experiencing now is what the work experiences, which I think is an interesting problem, and it's the hellish productivity of this, to the point that our perception systems are rendered, on the one hand, incapable to rationalize, but then on the other, triggers the need to make them more agile, more intuitive, in a sort of progressively rigorous sense. So by means of constructing hypotheses and retrofeeding the hypothesis with encounters, there is a process of increasing intuition, if you want, increasing artificially the intuition. It becomes important to remember, we shouldn't forget, that the framework of the work is the idea of contained expression underlying the idea of finite form. So it's a form that is finite, and therefore it contains expression at the same time that it is expressive. So that idea, coming from Ponti, is like a sort of thumb rule, or let's say what is the background, the thumb rule background of the evaluation process. And then finally, there is the production of this series. So if we go like Brunelleschi, Alberti, I will not talk about the name of the projects, but Palladio, Michelangelo, Laurenciana, Giulio Romano. It's at the same time interesting to stay in the images and to continue. So maybe just to start ending, the aims of the investigation are therefore manifold and are embedded within the procedural means, not outside of them. And they are, on the one hand, first, to study and conceptualize architectural precedents, understanding them as materials of work, rather than as a validating cultural context of the project of architecture. Materials to engage with and establish friendship and antagonism. Materials to be both insolently used and respectfully superseded, rather than motionless figures to be simply honored or criticized. Materials to be unveiled and made explicit, even obscenely, as sources for the project. Materials treated as ahistorical or transhistorical entities. Materials to both learn from and stretch to the very boundaries that they have implicitly set for themselves. Materials that transcend their alleged condition of existence and as a result achieve the status of a canon. Second aim is to denaturalize historical materials and explore their organizational variation, opening up the stereotyped encapsulations to which they have been condemned and revitalizing the inertness to which encyclopedic, deterministic, or critical forms of architectural history have sentenced them, rendering them available, unfulfilled, rather than immaculate or already realized, regarding them as inherently incomplete agendas, seeing them and through them with fresh and vigorous eyes, joyfully scientific eyes that rigorously yet playfully cut across them with cultivated yet far-fetched hypotheses. The hypothesis of an artistic scientist, not that of a hard scientist, flipping their fatal destiny inside out. Third, to turn the organization of a project into a computational instruction. Describing the architectural project candidly, as if for the first time, out of a heavily culturally informed perception, yet through a rigorous form of intuition that goes through the body rather than through the eyes only, and taking the jargon of those descriptive approximations, even if imprecise, literally as a vocabulary, following them as threads into the material, progressively increasing their precision and turning that precision into a categorical scaffolding made of complex hierarchies of organizational relationships between variable attributes of elements, and building with those attributes a set of instructions capable to rationalize their form, reconstruct it, intensify it, differentiate it, and transform it from within. 4, to develop across these a rigorously intuitive sensitivity by means of a methodical approach to AI, one that fluidly and gracefully navigates the open-ended sea of infinite possibilities while firmly defying its irrelevant incommensurability for the sake of it. One that uses method as a mediator that filters nonsense and distills genuine novelty, not as a recipe that efficiently produces effective results. More often than not, refried cultural cliches disguised as techno-driven innovations. 5, and finally, to synthesize a culturally relevant architectural proposal consisting of an uncluttered, tree-like canon genealogy that opens divergent lines of development out of a single source when mixed individually with multiple others. A family tree of continuous variations, the most diverse varieties, obvious variants, and freaky versions. One could say a multiplicity canon, a bursting canon, an exuberant canon, an open-ended canon, methodically constructed but irresponsibly undecided, a rigorous spectrum of imagination, a hypercanon. Almost good timing. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Ciro, for this exuberance. And yeah, we have. Yeah, we've seen like materials to prospect, but also to challenge them. And yeah, thinking by design, I think it's something important for architectural school. So now we will end our contributions with. Oh, that's because we are on the Zoom. I'll show. Minimize this. Well, that's Pira's. So our last contributor is Piera Riccio, and she's an Ellis PhD student in Alicante, and she holds a bachelor's degree in cinema and media engineering. She will highlight that she's not an architect, but she knows more about AI than most of us, and She's got a master's degree in ICT for Smart Societies and a master's degree in data science and engineering. In 2020, she was an affiliate at MetaLab at Harvard, and in 2021, she served as a research assistant at Oslo Metropolitan University. And her research interests focus on exploring the cultural, social, and artistic potential of AI. And for her PhD, she examines the impact of social media on women's lives and how they are perceived within the cultural ecosystem of social media. And she's also an expert in random social interactions. I read somewhere. So Piera's lecture today is titled Aesthetics of AI, Things We Learn from the Human Body. And in examining the impact of AI technologies on representations of human bodies in contemporary visual culture, Piera focuses on the complex interplay between technology and the digital aesthetics. Specifically, she explores how 3 distinct AI-based tools related to human aesthetics, namely beauty filters, content moderation, and generative AI, tend to produce biased representations of humans, potentially leading to undesirable societal and cultural effects. This research is based on the understanding that representational biases are often intersectional, mirroring the the complexity of reality, and encouraging us to consider the nuances, ethical implications involved in applying AI to co-creative contexts. So please help me to extend a warm welcome to Piera.
Hello. So first of all, I wanted to thank Rodrigo, Dario, and everyone for inviting me. When I received this invitation, the first thing I said was, I'm not an architect. So I was a bit like, okay, maybe my topics might not be so interesting. I don't know. I was a bit scared. But I want to say, actually, when I was a child, when I was 4 the first time, and then throughout my childhood, I really wanted to be an architect. This was my obsession, my childhood dream. And then I realized I have a very bad sense of space. So I said, well, maybe being an architect is not the best idea. But therefore, my inner child is overjoyed right now. Anyways, so as Aranzatsu said, I'm studying how AI is influencing the representation of humans. And maybe this research can be inspirational for some of you from different perspectives. Of course, when we talk about the representation of humans, we're talking about sensitive attributes, we're talking about ethical dimensions, and also political nuances. So I thought of bringing this perspective here. So in my research, I'm grounding my research in theories of human technology relations. And as Mario said earlier, AI is not just generative AI. And as Ciro said, AI is ubiquitous. So the way AI is actually influencing the representation of humans in my research is actually quite, complex and divided in different spheres. So the first sphere that we analyzed is this embodiment relationship, so seeing AI as an extension of the body, and in particular, we've been studying beauty filters and how beauty filters are changing facial aesthetics. And then in the second sphere, we're seeing AI as hermeneutics, so used to measure something. And in particular, we've looked at content moderation and how AI is used to decide which body representations are appropriate to be online and which ones are not. And finally, AI as an alter ego, so an alterity identity, that generates images and also human representations, which I guess the last part is maybe the one that is the most interesting today, so I will focus on that one a little bit more. As I said, in general, in my research, we're trying to have a perspective on the implicit judgments of AI, so these ethical and political spheres. So let's start with beauty filters. I don't know how many people here know or use beauty filters, but these are technologies available on social media. They're based on artificial intelligence for face recognition and then on augmented reality for overlaying, let's say, graphics to, create anything actually, but the most popular filters online are beauty filters which ideally enhance the aesthetics of people. Giving the idea that not only a better version of ourselves is possible, but it is also needed and technologically easy to achieve. Now, I really wanted to study beauty filters at the beginning of my PhD, but then I realized there are not so many data sets about beauty filters because, of course, they're in the hands of private companies. They're not so happy about sharing their data, and they're not so happy about people like me that make this type of research. So the first contribution was actually to create data sets of beauty filters, which was a little bit hard. We had to hijack, let's say, Instagram and all these, security policies that they have. But we selected 8 beauty filters based on their popularities, and then we managed to share the first large-scale data sets of beauty filters. To do so, we basically shared this framework, which we called the Open Filter, and the idea was that any researcher could make research on filters. And basically, we actually hack Instagram because Instagram only allows you to apply the filters on camera images. Therefore, you cannot basically beautify a set of faces or something like this. So with an Android emulator and a virtual webcam, we were projecting the dataset on the camera so that Instagram thought that the dataset was in front of the camera. And then with an auto-clicker system, we were automatizing it. And then basically we created these datasets and shared them. And finally, we could do research about beauty filters. I mean, statistically relevant with large-scale datasets. And what came out from our analysis is that beauty filters homogenize facial aesthetics, so they make everyone look kind of more similar to each other. When we apply beauty filters, we're more similar to each other, but with a trade-off with identity. So we don't lose our identity. When we apply beauty filters, we still look like ourselves, which makes sense, because if I apply a beauty filter and then I look like, I don't know, Kim Kardashian, then everyone on my social media platforms will be like, okay, Piera, you're scamming us. What is this, right? So yes. But okay, so beauty filters have an aesthetic canon, and then we wanted to dig a little bit into what this aesthetic canon is about, and the first thing that we looked at is racial biases. And sadly, our experiments highlighted that beauty filters make people look whiter. So if you apply race classifiers to faces after beautification, they look whiter. But, okay, maybe someone could say, okay, it's just because the skin color becomes brighter. So then we applied some explainable AI frameworks. I'm not going to go into the details of this, but we basically tried to understand why do people look whiter after we apply the filters. And it turns out that, yes, it is somewhat also related to the skin color, but actually it has something to do with the facial features. So the facial features get edited in a way that they look closer to typical facial features of white people, which represents a critical issue on beauty filters, because not only they're problematic for anyone, and actually societally for women in particular, but it turns out that they're even more problematic for women of color. So let's jump now into the second area, which was the one about hermeneutics and content moderation. In particular, in this area, we investigated the phenomenon of artistic nudity being censored online. So I guess everyone in this room knows that artistic nudity is a very, very important element in the history of art, and that artists have been inspired by the naked body throughout different historical periods. And that right now, social media companies and in general online platforms have a little bit of an hegemony on how culture is shared. So if you're an artist in nowadays world, you might want to have a profile online to reach a public and, sell your artworks and this type of things. Now, because of the scale of these platforms, it's impossible to think that actually humans can look at the images and, you know, for example, censor pornography or violence or all these type of things. I mean, in the past, this was done, and then it was found out that it has a tremendous psychological impact on the human content moderators. So for these reasons, we use AI as content moderation tools. So basically, it's automatic. When we upload something, there is an algorithm that kind of sees whether we are agreeing with the regulations and policies of the platforms or not. But AI is a black box, it's not explainable, we don't know much about how it works, so in, like, let's say the beginning of this research, we basically theorized that it's like having a opaque critique, that it's basically influencing the way art is created and shared nowadays, and especially the representation of bodies. And this critique is very much market-driven, because as I said earlier, these platforms are private companies. They might censor something less if it's economically interesting, and something more if it's niche and different and divergent, let's say, from the mainstream aesthetics, which is itself an interesting phenomenon. So at some point, we decided to interview artists that work with artistic nudity and have been censored online, and we tried to really dig into their experience with this phenomenon. Of course, they complained about the opacity, the lack of transparency, not understanding why some artworks get censored, some others do not, the fact that they cannot even appeal to the platforms, which is different than other historical periods in which maybe you were getting censored, but you could at least discuss your artworks. And also, something interesting that we investigated is how they're reacting to being censored online. So maybe they don't want to work with nudity that much anymore, and they prefer different, let's say, representations because they're scared of becoming invisible. And also they propose some possible solutions, and interestingly, none of the artists proposed as a solution improving the algorithms. So basically there was this belief that the algorithms are perfect and it's the platforms that have some sort of ideology for which they decide to censor nudity, whatever. Of course, as AI scientists, we have to disagree to a certain extent. I mean, of course, there is part of the fault is in the platforms, but also it is very hard for an AI algorithm to distinguish an artistic nude from a pornographic one. So basically, in one of my most recent publications, we tried to improve the state of the art on this. So we basically are collaborating with an advocacy group that provided us with a small data set of artistic nudity censored online. We audited some content moderation algorithms, and then basically we tried to improve the performance on artistic nudity, and in particular what came out of our research is that if we only look at the visual elements, it's actually very hard to distinguish between an artistic nude and a pornographic one. So we might have to include some contextual elements, some contextual reasoning, which we did by proposing a multimodal approach, and we managed to improve the performance by more than 20% on this, actually 20 percentage points on this small data set that we had. And now I'm going to jump instead to the last area, which is the one on AI generating humans, and in general, generative AI. So generative AI has a lot of biases, actually representational biases, which are very well documented in the literature. So representational biases are not biases that are gonna have an impact on some decisional aspects of the life of an individual. So for example, we're not choosing whether a person is accessing a certain type of job or a certain type of advertisement or whatever. So they don't have a direct impact on an individual, but they impact how a group of people is perceived in society. And therefore, they're often related to societal stigma, and there is the risk that if we just ignore them, they're gonna amplify existing representational biases in society. With all consequences that you can imagine. So because I was coming from the previous chapter, which was the one on content moderation, the first thing that I was wondering about generative AI is actually what can you and cannot you what you cannot generate on these platforms when it comes to humans. So the most popular text-to-image generation platforms, they have a policies, so you can't generate anything, you can't generate pornography, for example, you can't generate violence. But then I was wondering, okay, but can you generate, for example, ugly people, whatever that means, or can you generate, and I was, basically auditing the systems on a lot of other dimensions which are related to societal stigma. And we audited these systems. We looked at the policies of the most popular text-to-image generation platforms and the things that they censor. It's interesting because, for example, DALL-E also censors politics and health, which the others do not. Some of them censor nudity only if explicit, others censor any type of nudity. And then basically we had a lot of prompts, and we basically analyzed how these prompts, whether these prompts were generating images or they were getting censored. And what came out of this research that we did is that there are some areas in which it's actually debatable why we cannot generate these images, and there is the risk of creating another bias, which is a sort of invisibility bias, right? For example, you cannot generate people with a certain disease, kind of assuming that these people should not exist in society, right? So we did this research, but right now I'm looking at the other side of it. So basically, I'm trying to investigate how people are using the platforms and what type of aesthetics is there in the humans that are generated by the platforms. The idea that we're following is to develop an interpretable by design pipeline to understand these aesthetics, but I'm not going to go into the details of this work in progress because it's work in progress, so I don't have results to show yet. But I want to share, let's say, a point of contact, between the representation of humans and then their surroundings. So normally, when researchers study representational biases, the classical approach is to look at a specific area, let's say, for example, jobs, and then look at sensitive attributes, which could be gender, skin tone, or this type of things. There was this very interesting paper that came out, I think, between last year, more or less last year, in which, for example, they share the average skin tone of images generated by Stable Diffusion when you prompt with a certain job. So, for example, architect, lawyer, CEO, politician, and you can see, it gets darker and darker until social worker or fast food worker. So, to give an idea of how much the systems can be biased. But this is the classical approach, but quite recently I was reading a paper in which they say, okay, you can study these biases when you know what you're looking for, but biases are actually intersectional, and they touch areas that maybe we don't even necessarily look into or look at. And so they proposed a different approach, which was they called it open bias. So the idea was to look beyond. And then I saw this example that I decided to bring today. So the prompt was, small child hurrying towards a bus on a dirty road. And then somehow the child has to be black and the environment has to resemble an African landscape, right? So the fact that the child has to be black and that the landscape has to resemble Africa is not written in the prompt. Just the fact that this road is dirty kind of leads to this generation. So here comes, let's say, my connection between my work and yours, which is, of course, like human representation. I mean, if we look at human representation, it's very obvious to look at all these political dimensions, but should we care about these dimensions only when we look at humans, or should we care about them also when we talk about architecture and when we talk about urban design? I mean, I realized today also with your talk, Rodrigo, that you're very much aware of this, but I mean, I found it interesting that at least with the keywords that I use on, you know, looking for papers and the things I read, this is not so much explored in literature, like the relationship between urban environments and how they're generated and other types of societal and political biases. And here comes, let's say, what is for me an open question that came to me while preparing this presentation, and maybe it's a little bit of a provocation. So if architecture and urban design can also carry biases about humans, the fact that we are now using AI in these fields, is it maybe a way to concretize these representational biases? Because, I mean, until now I said representational biases, they don't really have an impact on the individuals, they have an impact on how a group of people is perceived in society, right? But then if these models are biased and we give to these models the power of leading our creative process towards something else, then is there a risk of concretizing the biases? Of course, I don't have an idea about this, also because I'm not an expert in your field, and I have very little knowledge on how these tools are being used in the field, but this for me stays as an open question, and I was surprised to see that there is not so much research going on this topic. So this is all from my side. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you so much, Piera. Well, for those of you who are still with us, thank you so much as well. You can, I think we can just sit here so that we can, and somebody close the poster, so here. There we go. Yeah, I go center of the big. I think Rodrigo, he's just coming with a microphone. So, really, heavy chairs. And my work mainly is going to be like a spokesperson. So, I mean, we can discuss between each other. I don't know if, well, maybe we can carry on in Spanish, or you prefer it? Okay, vale. Pues vale, ya está, vale.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Vale, bueno, pues eso, que yo estoy aquí como un poco para recoger vuestras preguntas o que se las podéis dirigir directamente a Siro, Piera y Enriqueta. Y bueno, también no sé si alguien se va a animar. Venga, muy bien, gracias.
Buenas, soy Víctor de Baugut Arquitectura y es una pregunta referente al primer ponente, que no lo tenemos ya con nosotros, pero bueno. Es de cómo planteaba que los datasets podían ser un canon. Entonces me parecía muy interesante la idea, pero a veces me parecía que teníamos que reflexionar bien sobre qué significaba que un dataset fuera un canon, porque los cánones es un concepto que tardaba años en asentarse, que mucha gente y muchas sociedades habían verificado y tardaba muchos años en tener impacto. Entonces, si ahora un dataset es un canon, puede ser que un canon tenga impacto en minutos, en segundos, en días, si lo tiras a un poco largo. Entonces, claro, en ese margen de tiempo, la sociedad no ha podido verificar si ese canon pues es correcto o no es correcto. Entonces, esto puede tener muchas implicaciones que no sé muy bien cómo las tendríamos que gestionar, pero creo que por lo menos tendríamos que tenerlo en mente.
Sí, no sé si, Ciro, quieres como, tú que has hablado también como de cánones y de precedentes que utilizamos como material creativo, ¿quieres?
O sea, no puedo hablar por Mario,
No.
pero yo diría que decir que un dataset es un canon, o por lo menos para mí, que yo también lo digo, en realidad es una provocación, no es una verdad. Pero a la vez no es meramente una provocación en el sentido de que es una afirmación falsa o polémica y ya, sino que se me ocurre que es como, bueno, ¿qué es un canon hoy? Ha devenido eso, algo así. Y quizás las ideas de canon que presuponemos son el canon se han vuelto obsoletas, simplemente. Y en todo caso, lo que me parece interesante es reconocer esa degradación de la idea de canon, reconocer la falsificación que tiene un dataset respecto de un canon y a la vez reconocer que esa falsificación no tiene connotaciones morales, sino es un nuevo estatus, digamos. Y en ese sentido me parece que lo que es provocativo es ese devenir, digamos, ¿no? No es solamente la estipulación de que un dataset es un canon, sino que en todo caso el devenir mismo es provocativo. Y me parece que como mínimo nos hace pensar, nos subvierte respecto de moralismos. Eso. Así es como lo vería, digamos.
Aquí tenemos, Rodrigo.
Bueno, gracias a todos, ha sido espectacular. Quería eso último que has... ¿Tú entiendes español, no? ¿Estás en Alicante?
Sí.
¿Entiendes español? No, esto último que has dicho, que es esta provocación, ¿no? Que yo creo que tiene que ver un poco con lo de Rodrigo, y no sé si esto del dataset y el canon. Tenía una pregunta, porque tú decías, ¿qué hay si incorporamos cuestiones sociales de género, entiendo, ¿no? Iba por ahí. Y no sé si, la pregunta es combinada, no sé si en lo que estabais planteando vosotros, que no nos has especificado qué atributos metías en esos 6 atributos, pero era por preguntarte, ¿había algún atributo que no fuera arquitectónico? O si estáis estudiando la posibilidad, como dice ella, de meter atributos que tengan que ver con lo social o lo de género, que pueda acabar definiendo la estética o a la inversa, ¿no? Y preguntarte a ti, que entiendo que la pregunta no la has pensado previamente, ¿cómo crees que influiría? Es una doble pregunta, gracias.
¿Querés contestar vos primero?
Sí.
No hay atributos que no sean arquitectónicos en los que soy arquitecto, digamos, y me interesa la arquitectura como disciplina y es muy disciplinarista lo que hago. Ahora, lo que en todo caso se podría preguntar es qué es esos atributos que defino como arquitectónicos. En realidad es bastante parcial, es una idea de arquitectura formal organizativa, levemente material, sería.
No soy arquitecta y no soy española, hoy es una lucha de sobrevivencia para mí. Entonces, voy a hacer un ejemplo, pero me lo voy a inventar porque yo no sé. Vale, imaginamos un arquitecto de un país no sé, del sur global, ¿cómo se llama en inglés? No sé, un arquitecto allí que empieza a utilizar estas herramientas, como por ejemplo Dalí, Midjourney, no sé qué, para inspirarse o para su práctica arquitectónica o algo así. Y estas herramientas tienen una estética súper occidental, súper sobre el norte del mundo y todo eso. Y es una manera de colonizar el mundo, ¿no? De globalizar la cultura, de cancelar lo que es la cultura de otros pueblos, ¿no? Lo hemos hecho toda la historia de manera física y ahora lo estamos haciendo con estas herramientas digitales y tecnológicas. Y este es de verdad, es solo un ejemplo, el primero que tengo en mi cabeza, pero en general la idea de imponer una estética sobre otra gente. Y si utilizamos estas herramientas sin preguntarnos, ¿no? Hay un significado otro detrás de esta imagen que está generando, luego yo creo que podría pasar. No sé si... ¿Sí? Vale. Gracias.
Ahí hay una,
sí,
y luego Rodrigo, luego le pasas a...
Nada, quería saber vuestra reacción a esta idea. Si la IA generativa no fuese una caja negra, igual que los algoritmos, los artistas que hablaban de la censura los descontaban como responsables porque creían que era la censura que venía de arriba, pero los algoritmos eran perfectos, entre comillas, porque era una black box. De la misma manera que decía antes Mario Carpo, que como al final lo que tú le das como texto te lo devuelve a la idea conceptual del dataset, ¿no? Y estamos atrapados en que lo que le decimos nos lleva al valle de probabilidad, porque usamos el lenguaje y nos encierra en un valle probabilístico del que no podemos salir, y por eso te da como resultados igual menos arquitectos de color. Cuando le pides una imagen de un CEO te da una mujer, no te da una mujer. Cuando le pides una persona de Human Resources te suele dar una mujer, etc. Y también si tratásemos de meter como temas de género o que describan cosas físicas de una persona y le pedimos que genere una imagen de una arquitectura, nos va a introducir una persona. Al final, creo que me he ido del hilo, pero preguntaros eso, si no fueran una caja negra y si fueran diseñadas, si esa responsabilidad estaría menos, no sé, se podría atribuir.
Creo que es para mí, ¿no?
Sí, esa responsabilidad se podría, ¿qué dijiste?
Sí, se diluye la responsabilidad por el mero hecho de que sean cajas negras.
Ok.
Podéis contestar, digamos, o Enriqueta también igual, porque ¿no? Tú también estás como ahí hackeando el prompt, los que queráis.
A ver, yo los proyectos que he presentado aquí, no es una caja negra. Los modelos los entrenamos y las datasets las creamos nosotros. Son un poco... No tenemos la dataset que puede crear Microsoft porque no tenemos recursos, pero precisamente el discurso intelectual es cuál es la pregunta y qué tipo de data articulas para investigar la pregunta. Por eso también el último proyecto que enseñé, que era la idea de glitch art, que bueno, cuando se promueve, cuando Nam June Paik empezó a promover la idea de glitch art, que fue más cuando empezó el media y tiene esa exhibición con la televisión y el imán encima, ya estaba tratando de comunicar todo lo que es media es data y por lo tanto corrompible. Entonces yo creo que el uso de Midjourney y estas herramientas es muy juguetón, pero claro, el problema es que no tienes muchísimo control, pero bueno, yo creo que hay un área de investigación que también es cuando usas un equipo más multidisciplinar en el clúster, pues claro, tenemos computer scientists y utilizamos modelos de Python y entrenamos la dataset y discutimos qué tipo de datasets, cómo generar lo que es lo que nos genera y qué preguntas podemos investigar, sobre todo pues en temas medioambientales. Pero, no es una caja negra, no debería ser. Y la tecnología puede ser muy regresiva si no se difunde. Creo que todo el mundo puede acceder al razonamiento del AI si hay un esfuerzo institucional por difundirlo. Y los conceptos que hay detrás de cada herramienta, desde Dimensionality Reduction, Style Transfer, se pueden entender y seas más o menos computationally, que tengas conocimiento de lo que es la tecnología, creo que es muy importante que conceptualmente haya una participación amplia en el debate de cómo funcionan, cómo se entrenan y qué se puede hacer con ellas. Sí.
No sé si queréis añadir o si no pasamos a la pregunta de Darío. ¿Quieres decir algo, Pira? Vale.
Solo quiero añadir sobre el tema de la responsabilidad. Yo creo que sí, creo que el campo de Explainable AI, Interpretable AI es muy importante sobre todo para eso, porque por ejemplo, en mi caso, ¿no? Con el desnudo artístico, el desnudo pornográfico, toda la gente que ha desarrollado estas Content Moderation Algorithms para moderar el desnudo pornográfico lo han hecho de buena intención, ¿no? Porque el porno online y todas las consecuencias que puede tener si no lo censuramos. Pero como ha dicho Enriqueta, lo que pasa es que a veces no hay grupos de personas interdisciplinares que pueden contribuir al diálogo. Entonces, me imagino un grupo de ingenieros que están allí haciendo, no se van a preguntar, pero hay un tipo de desnudo que no es pornográfico y que no queremos censurar porque es bueno para la cultura, para la sociedad, ¿no? Entonces yo creo que si hubiera una manera más interpretable de hacer estas cosas, luego toda la gente con un sentido común con los objetivos es difícil, no quería censurar o cancelar el desnudo artístico, ¿no? Pero si no sabemos por qué pasa, entonces que pase, ¿no? Entonces yo creo que sí, que la responsabilidad sería más distribuida si toda la gente podría entender lo que pasa en los algoritmos.
Yo no sé, o sea, no es exactamente a la pregunta, o quizás es la palabra responsabilidad que me hace mucho ruido, porque parece que estuviera naturalizada. O sea, ¿qué responsabilidad e impuesta por quién? Sería la pregunta. ¿Y por qué estamos hablando de tanta responsabilidad también? ¿Y es nuestra responsabilidad tener responsabilidad como arquitectos? ¿O es justamente nuestra responsabilidad no tener responsabilidad? Me parece que hay un inverso del argumento, que es realmente jugar y realmente aceptar que cualquier forma artística siempre ha sido una manifestación de poder, en lugar de tratar una manifestación artística con responsabilidad respecto del problema del poder, ¿no? Como si tuviera que asumir un rol paranoico, ¿no? ¿No nos pagan acaso para no tener responsabilidad? O sea, o para saber dónde ponerla también, ¿no? para no tomarla tan en serio. Y la otra cosa es, todas esas otredades de las que hablamos, me pregunto, ¿son otredades? O sea, obviamente son otredades, pero ¿por qué hablamos siempre de las mismas otredades? ¿No? Si hablamos de las mismas otredades, ya no son tan otredades, ¿no? Son formas de imposición también. Entonces me parece que es un tema bastante difícil, ese problema de la responsabilidad, y no daría por sentado nada en ese contexto.
Aquí me has provocado bastante, Ciro, entonces voy a dar este permiso para poder decir algo, ¿no?
Sí,
bueno, que estoy en frontal desacuerdo con lo que acabas de decir, pero sobre todo porque, quiero decir, tú hablabas de que la expresión está contenida, que hay que descontextualizar las obras de arquitectura, pero el único arquitecto que has traído a la mesa es Gio Ponti. Gio Ponti es un arquitecto que en su juventud estuvo militando en el Partido Fascista Italiano y claro, cuando proyectamos, independientemente de que sea un experimento completamente loco o un edificio, que por supuesto que hay una responsabilidad, es que no puedo ni entrar en ese debate, ¿no? Pero hasta en un experimento nosotros estamos trayendo, obviamente, variables que están impregnadas en las imágenes, ¿no? Y no podemos deshacernos de ellas porque sea lúdico, ¿no? Lo lúdico, como lo político, es exactamente lo mismo, ¿no? Entonces, vamos, o lo político es lúdico también, ¿no? Y todo es un juego. Entonces, quiero decir que digo, por contestar, ¿no? O sea, preguntarte si realmente crees que podemos trabajar solo con las imágenes completamente descontextualizadas de quién las produjo, ¿no? y de su contexto histórico.
No, completamente descontextualizadas no. Pero sí eligiendo los contextos y no aceptándolos, no aceptándolos por defecto. No sé, a mí, por ejemplo, arquitectura fascista, es casualidad que puse a Gio Ponti, aunque nada es casualidad, a mi entender, ¿no? Pero, y de hecho tenía tres cosas para mostrar, que eran Ponti, Koolhaas y Lequeux. Y son tres de varios, y están elegidos por los alumnos, no por mí, que son, por supuesto, parte de una base de datos que yo definí y que es occidental, ¿no? Es occidental eurocéntrica. Todo eso es a propósito. O sea, en realidad es más un acto de provocación que un acto de naturalización. Pero bueno, volviendo al tema, digamos, la arquitectura de Gio Ponti me parece interesante de todos modos, ¿no? Me parece que es interesante porque perdura, porque influye, porque está presente incluso cuando no la vemos, y negarla ideológicamente me parece negador. O sea, porque está ahí y la valoramos, y cuando entramos en este espacio nos reímos también, ¿no? O sea, nos reímos de las varias cosas que aparecen en este espacio, que en realidad pueden ser problemáticas a nivel responsabilidad, y sin embargo nos reímos, porque también nuestro trabajo es reírnos, y reírnos no es ser banales, también es transformar el status quo de la arquitectura, verlo con otros ojos, ¿no? A mí hay arquitectos, o sea, y de vuelta, no es que quiera, o sea, en un punto me tienta a ser provocativo. Digo, ahora estoy en Roma y estuve bastante dando vueltas por Italia, y yo no soy especialmente un arquitecto al que le interesa demasiado la repetición, ¿no? Sin embargo, me parece soberbio el nivel de ¿cómo se dice? Ruthlessness de la arquitectura fascista. Me parece soberbio. Digamos, y si no aceptamos que eso está en algún lado de nuestro inconsciente y si no aceptamos que en algún lado, si bien nos horroriza, nos fascina, me parece que caemos en un lugar que es como, bueno, de vuelta, es como un poco demasiado, digo, yo uso la palabra serio, me parece interesante la idea de seriedad e irresponsabilidad, ¿no? O sea, me parece que solamente seriedad en realidad no es serio. Eso.
Tenemos, creo, Darío y Luis, ambos. No sé dónde está el micrófono ya.
¿Es Darío, Paco?
También. Perdón. Vale. Se está poniendo interesante.
Y casi lo que yo iba a preguntar es, llegando a esto, igual demasiado serio en el mal sentido de la palabra. Perdón, serio y banal. O sea, no quería caer ahí, pero bueno, me ha tocado. Gracias por las intervenciones, me han parecido sorprendente y felizmente complementarias, quería decirlo, porque ¿sí? Es una cosa que me ha sorprendido. Y quería volver un poquito al hilo del tema del canon. En realidad es una reacción que hila un poco lo que hemos estado comentando, pero casi de lo que más... Una cosa que no se ha mencionado explícitamente, pero creo que estaba implícitamente en todos, en la presentación de Enriqueta, en la tuya y por supuesto en la de Ciro, era esa idea de, bueno, la escala y la velocidad a la que estas herramientas nos están exponiendo y la propia naturaleza de los procesos probabilísticos que gobiernan cómo funcionan estas herramientas de aprendizaje profundo, etcétera, etcétera, cuestionan un poquito ciertas categorías que tenemos imbuidas culturalmente en cuanto a certeza. Es decir, hay una cierta revolución epistemológica. Sé que es un palabra muy un poco hortera, un poco pomposo, pero creo que me entendéis, ¿no? O sea, hay una idea, nuestras certezas y certidumbres están mutando, porque ahora son aproximaciones probabilísticas, ¿no? Y muchos de estos modelos, sobre todo en IA generativa, etcétera, etcétera, producen cosas que, si bien nos sorprenden, no nos sorprenden tanto porque son plausibles, ¿no? Es decir, incluso cuando ChatGPT se inventaba, no sé si haciendo, supongo que lo sigue haciendo, o lo habrán tuneado, se inventaba las referencias, estos autores que no existían, estos papers estupendos y tal, no existían, pero deberían existir, ¿no? Casi nos estaba diciendo que debería haber un paper, o sea, un artículo de un tal autor que hubiera tratado este y estos temas, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, lo que quería preguntaros con esto era un poco que articulares una reflexión un pelín más específica sobre esto. O sea, que Ciro lo ha articulado un poco, pero yo creo que también me gustaría oír a Enriqueta a través de todos esos ejemplos que has mostrado a gran velocidad, que me hubiera gustado verlos más lentamente, me ha costado seguirlo, pero decir, ¿con qué nuevas categorías de certidumbre estamos trabajando ahora? Esto hila un poco el tema de responsabilidad, hila un poco el tema de lo que consideramos un canon, ahí podríamos entrar, sería un tema muy largo. Canon también es una cosa normativa y ahora obviamente los procesos de producción cultural están gobernados por estos algoritmos, estas grandes bases de datos, por lo tanto es un canon efectivo, yo estoy totalmente convencido, pero me gustaría escucharos un poco eso de cómo ha cambiado las categorías en las que estamos pensando, cómo sabemos que algo es la respuesta a algo, si estamos buscando más la pregunta ¿no? que la respuesta en realidad, y cómo afecta esto a vuestra práctica intelectual y profesional.
Este comentario me parece muy interesante. Esta ponencia que preparé, de hecho, la hice más desde un punto de geográfico, porque hice geografía por 2 años, entonces la reestructuré hoy así, pero he hecho otras ponencias donde hablo de la naturaleza del conocimiento humano y el estudio de AI y particularmente Margaret Bowden reflexiona mucho sobre esto Una reflexión es el conocimiento intuitivo. Bueno, es que solo me sé el inglés porque es la primera vez que hago una ponencia en castellano, ¿no? El tacit knowledge, ¿no? Sí. Y es esa forma de transmitir conocimiento a través de la experiencia. No sé, es como Stanford Winter decía, ¿no? El surfer, tú no puedes explicar cómo coger una ola, pero la coges y es la interacción material. Y esa forma de transmitir conocimiento, que es a través del contacto humano y de la intuición, se basa en una calibración, o sea, no es tan directa, tan racional, sino que vas calibrando el conocimiento. Y también Roger Penrose habla de esto. Entonces, claro, el Neural Networks, los procesos matemáticos simulan la función neurológica y por lo tanto empiezan a crear formas de conocimiento más parecidas al ser humano y de hecho más tácito. Y es interesante para la arquitectura y el urbanismo. A ver, yo normalmente soy una arquitecta muy poco popular porque yo soy como que me salgo de la disciplina siempre, o sea, me interesa todo lo que no es arquitectura y luego lo meto en la arquitectura. Y he tenido experiencias de Patrick Schumacher decirme: la ciudad no es para las abejas, o me acuerdo otra, ¿quién fue? Sí, Pierre Vittori una vez se levantó: I don't care about the shit of the cow, no sé por qué ahora me ha salido esto. Pero, sí, no me vaya a dar. Pero digamos que este conocimiento intuitivo te permite entender la posición de soluciones arquitectónicas dentro de diferentes parámetros. Por ejemplo, el techo, el roof que hicimos para China, pues mirábamos qué pasa cuando entra la luz, para que caliente, para que baje el agua en ciertos puntos. Entonces, no tienes una solución, tienes una solución optimizada para una cosa, luego para la otra, pero al ponerte los diferentes parámetros, pues vas viendo que no tienes una óptima, ¿no? Esto es el evolutionary algorithm. Y realmente estás en un trabajo intelectual con la herramienta mucho más intuitivo y de alguna manera humano también, ¿no? O sea, eso no sé si te responde o es más como una reacción a lo que me acabas de decir, no sé.
Sí, paso a Paco y Luis y luego si la gente se nos va, si no...
Vale, con eso si queréis
sí,
cerramos porque también Iván, que está grabando, se tiene que ir a hacer la compra.
Eso iba a decir. Sí.
Hola, buenas tardes. Gracias. Ha sido muy entretenida. Me ha parecido muy estupenda las comunicaciones, la presentación que habéis hecho. Y bueno, como ha pasado el tiempo, desde que quise tomar la palabra, pues se ha ido hablando sobre lo que iba a comentar y las observaciones, ¿no? Y es un poco, iba a hablar de las capas, para hacer un poco el símil también de las redes neuronales, ¿no? Que es la base de todos este tipo de algoritmos, donde hay un montón de probabilidad que es la que decide cuándo para el proceso, ¿no? ¿Y a qué me quiero referir con las capas? Pues que tenemos que verlo como las aplicaciones. Bueno, mi concepto es qué nivel quiero yo conseguir de esta herramienta. Y puedo tener distintos niveles, distintas capas. Si yo me voy a pasear por el monte y me inspira una rama, un tronco de un árbol, y le doy vueltas en mi cabeza y de ahí voy a sacar un proyecto, un diseño, puede que no sea el mismo que si estoy en otro país, en otra civilización, donde los árboles son diferentes. Entonces, claro que los datos tienen sesgo, porque los datos los recogen los que pueden recogerlos, y los que pueden recogerlos no están en todos los lugares, y no vamos a especificar más. Tampoco podemos decir que debería haber la misma cantidad de información del todo tipo de arquitecturas, la misma cantidad de información de todo el mismo tipo de, voy a decir algo, de peinados o de tonos de piel, que lo podemos decir, pero ¿quién se encarga de recopilar esos datos? Muchos vienen del propio Instagram, de nosotros mismos cuando estamos trabajando, mandando fotos. ¿Quién manda fotos? O sea, por decirlo de alguna manera, ¿no? Entonces yo creo que responsabilidad, un poco de lo que decíais, la nuestra, es utilizar bien las herramientas, ser consciente de que lo que nos aportan es también una inspiración como una de ellas, ¿eh? Es una inspiración como la que te aporta cuando cogías un barro y empezabas a modelar, o una hoja de papel. También es verdad que podemos conseguir procesos de optimización, que para eso los números van muy bien, ¿no? Y yo creo que hay que ponerse en distintos niveles, distintas capas, y entender que es una ayuda y que somos nosotros los que tenemos que decidir con qué nos quedamos, porque sesgo va a haber, ¿vale? Y de género, bueno, una barbaridad, porque yo estaba haciendo experimentos con temas de género y te quedas alucinado, ¿vale? Entonces, bueno, simplemente era una observación a aportar un poco el comentario, ya que es mesa redonda, no es preguntar, pero sí habéis estado hablando todos sobre lo mismo, y yo creo que es una oportunidad muy buena el poder tener estas nuevas herramientas con las que poco a poco vamos a ir creciendo, porque nosotros mismos al preguntar nos damos cuenta que preguntando 2 veces lo mismo nos salen resultados distintos. Entonces, eso crea incertidumbre. Bueno, pues yo voy 2 veces por el mismo parque o el mismo calle y unas veces veo el edificio de una manera y otras lo veo de otra. Yo también tengo mi aleatoriedad a la hora de pensar o de sentir, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, por eso lo de artificial, ¿no? Que hay que verlo, no sé. Yo creo que tenemos que ser nosotros los que seamos capaces de discernir sobre ese tipo de elementos, que parece que hay una caja negra. La hay en el sentido de que no sabemos exactamente lo que hay, pero si conocemos un poco cómo se genera, yo creo que nos quitan los miedos, ¿no? Que es lo que yo quería aportar. Gracias.
Gracias, Paco.
¿Queréis comentar o le doy el micro a Luis?
Pues si quieres que pregunte Luis, y luego si alguien quiere comentar a ambas, así ya terminamos.
Bueno, de nuevo gracias, y siento esta última pregunta, porque me parece que podíamos abrir de nuevo la sesión. Tenemos 4 horas más. Básicamente, si la sesión va sobre nuevas pedagogías, me encantaría que hicieses, yo no la puedo hacer un comentario, es una pregunta como lo más concreta posible. ¿Cuál es el rol de las escuelas en este contexto?
¿Cuál es el rol?
De las escuelas en este contexto, estamos en la escuela, digamos, de arquitectura. ¿Qué capacidades creéis que son más urgentes para el arquitecto de la era en la que nos movemos, ¿no? Y yo me parece que eso luego lo vamos a continuar la conversación mañana en el Colegio de Arquitectos, digamos, pero me parece que es interesante pensar. Ha habido como muchas polémicas que ya habéis apuntado, o a través de vuestro propio trabajo, a partir de comentarios que se han hecho sobre particularidades, ¿no? Aunque sea de modo provisional, y quizás no es muy, digamos, ni justo ni posible contestar a esto, me encantaría oír cuál creéis que son las urgencias para las escuelas, capacitar en qué rol el nuevo autor, de alguna manera.
¿En qué rol?
El nuevo autor. Digamos, ¿qué tipo de autor estamos construyendo en las escuelas? Autora, digamos, ¿qué tipo de figura de arquitecta estamos construyendo en las escuelas después de haber trabajado con lo que habéis trabajado? De diferentes perspectivas, sensibilidades y agendas,
contextos,
¿no?
¿Estamos quiénes? ¿Las escuelas o nosotros?
No, yo creo que vosotros. Me gustaría escuchar vuestras opiniones particulares, digamos, porque seguro que no son iguales, pero me parece que, de algún modo, habéis mostrado, si no experimentos, trabajos que están muy vinculados a trabajo en un entorno académico, ¿no? Entonces me parece pero que en el fondo reflejan ambiciones que son de tipo disciplinar, y por lo tanto eso lo que hace es construye una figura disciplinar particular, ¿no? Entonces me parece que sería interesante como explicitarlo al máximo, si podéis. Si no, lo dejamos y continuamos mañana.
Don't look at me.
Sí, no, o Enriqueta o Ciro, o si no yo me lanzo.
Yo hablé la
O Piero.
¿Eh?
Para que se vea el póster.
Esa no es la mía.
Así
No,
como,
no, pero para que se vea el póster, se nos toda la ventana esa.
así como docentes, ¿cómo lo veis?
¿Qué tipo de autor estamos construyendo?
Sí.
O promoviendo, o,
Sí.
o se ha de construir.
Eso es.
O sea, yo creo que es una... O sea, diría dos... Así, obviamente tengo muchas posibles respuestas, pero dos cosas que diría son un autor que piensa que piensa sensiblemente o siente intelectualizadamente. Un autor que está entre medio y que funda ambas cosas en la idea de disciplina, en la transformación de la disciplina tal cual es y en la expansión de las capacidades de la disciplina. Esa es una. Y la otra posible respuesta que diría es un autor que se posiciona, quizás, no sé, quizás está mal decirlo así, pero diría en un nivel meta respecto de la tecnología. O sea, que es capaz de, digo, meta en el sentido de no ser un autor que naturaliza la tecnología, ni tampoco un autor que critica la tecnología, sino un autor que se posiciona por encima de la tecnología. No sé si la palabra es por encima, digamos, pero que opera como utilizando no meramente oportunistamente las capacidades de la tecnología, pero que la toma tal cual es también, ¿no? Esos serían dos posibles hilos. No sé si para ese lado apuntaba tu pregunta o más allá de eso. Otra cosa que me hace pensar, un segundito, Chava, es que estas cosas que mostré las doy en electivas, en materias selectivas. Doy en materias selectivas que no son taller de proyectos, se llaman design seminars, ¿no? O electiva, optativa, electives, no sé, depende del contexto. Ese espacio, en parte, me lo atribuyeron. O sea, es como una manera de encapsular que cualquier forma de investigación está puesta en ese lugar, que tiene como ciertas libertades, pero no tiene suficientes influencias, algo así. Entonces, jardín de infantes, algo así. A mí no me resulta cómodo ese lugar, por un lado. O sea, ideológicamente me resulta incómodo en el sentido de que entonces opera en una especie de vacío de influencia, algo así, ¿no? O de incertidumbre respecto de la influencia real que puede tener el trabajo. Por otro lado, me queda cómodo en el sentido de poder explorar y avanzar. Creo que ese es un problema incluso de escuelas, o sea, estoy hablando de escuelas que en general son bastante permisivas y research oriented, ¿no? Que me parece que es un atributo muy interesante en escuelas. No sé cómo funciona esta escuela en ese contexto, pero me parece que es un atributo muy interesante y a la vez que limita, ¿no? Porque también es como que separa, hace espacios para investigar, ¿no? Nada, se me ocurren esas respuestas.
No sé si queréis añadir algo más, o si no, no sé. Ah, bueno.
Es una pregunta rápida.
Sí.
Es una respuesta a lo que estaba preguntando.
Vale, pues terminamos contigo, si te parece bien.
Vale.
Mesa, en vez de con los
Perfectamente. Me parece muy bien, además.
Hablando de la docencia, digamos, estuve hace unos meses en una ponencia de docencia en el Instituto de Empresa de cómo afrontaban ellos la docencia con la numérica. Y el profesor lo que postulaba era que ahora a sus alumnos, en lugar de pedirles el resultado, en lugar de pedirles el texto, en lugar de pedirles la imagen, lo que les pedía era el proceso. Los prompts que habían usado para sacar ese texto o poco, lo hemos hecho esta mañana, que había un poco de prompting, pero también era mucho de nexos, de hacer links con cosas para sacar al final la imagen, y lo que hacía era analizar ese proceso para ver si el alumno había utilizado solo un prompt para llegar a la respuesta, si había utilizado 200 prompts o se había utilizado 10. Y a la vez planteaba, esto es una carga de trabajo muy grande para la docencia, tener que analizar esto, pero la cosa es que yo también uso la IA para analizar esto mismo. Entonces le doy a la IA lo que han hecho mis alumnos con IA, ella la analiza, pone una nota o lo que sea, y además también me sirve para yo luego preguntarle a la IA y a mis alumnos cuáles son los conceptos que les han quedado más claros, cuáles son los conceptos que les ha costado más entender. Y entonces tenía como estadísticas de sus clases. Dice, esto no nos habíamos imaginado nunca poder tener estadísticas de cómo están yendo nuestras clases. Entonces esto daba un giro a todo lo que es la educación. Pero eso tenía que llevar detrás pues, que los docentes aprendieran a utilizar estas herramientas.
Muy bien, pues yo creo que podemos dejarlo aquí. Enriqueta, ¿querías decir algo?
Sí.
No, bueno, yo estoy de acuerdo con casi todo lo que has dicho, sinceramente. O sea, el pensamiento crítico para mí es lo importante, o sea, es cuestionar y eso se tiene que fomentar culturalmente en las escuelas. Y luego está la diversidad en la forma de ejercer, porque no todos los programas permiten experimentar con la tecnología. O sea, yo la verdad es que considero, bueno, me siento con mucha suerte de tener el clúster en Bipro, porque es el programa de la Bartlett que yo creo que tiene más libertad y que tiene una cultura de exploración tecnológica, pero he dado clase, por ejemplo, en el MARPACTU, que sí tiene mucha reputación, pero a mí me parecía como demasiado encorsetado y muchísimo más aburrido. Entonces, a mí me gusta la actitud o sea, me gusta la actitud cuando es abierta y cuando permites incluso posiciones casi contrapuestas. Me parece muchísimo más importante, incluso gente que estaría opuesta radicalmente a ella y que tuviera un espacio. Pero también diversidad de programas y pensamiento crítico y sobre todo intentar expandir la cultura de las herramientas, incluso a la gente que las rechaza o a lo mejor que ya se siente que es algo que no pueden asumir, porque también hay un problema de que hay ciertas generacional o un problema pues cualquier, que hay gente que rechaza. Entonces yo creo que las herramientas se tienen que dar en muchos niveles. Se puede dar a nivel conceptual y se puede dar más a nivel técnico, y incluso aunque no las sepas usar, siempre puedes participar, y es importante participar en el pensamiento crítico acerca de cómo se tienen que utilizar, creo que.
Una cosita más quise decir. Me parece que hay una urgencia también, es que, porque estábamos hablando de enseñanza, pero me parece que, de hecho, las ponencias en general tienen mucho de investigación a través de la enseñanza, o con la enseñanza, o paralela a la enseñanza. Entonces, me parece que la idea de investigación está como underlying todo lo que dijimos, con muy diferentes aproximaciones, pero me parece que hay una responsabilidad respecto de la investigación, que es urgente, si querés, que es que la investigación está cooptada por las ciencias duras o las ciencias blandas. Y me parece que ambas cosas son muy perniciosas para la arquitectura, que no es ni una ciencia dura ni una ciencia blanda. Si algo, para mí, es una forma de arte, y por eso me parece que está buena, o por lo menos trato de construir una idea de ciencia artística, o de ciencia jovial, en el sentido nietzscheano. Me parece que ese perfil tiene poco sustrato en los ámbitos académicos en general, incluso de muy diversas culturas y geografías. La idea de investigación está muy seteada en ciertos lugares, paga ciertas cosas, publica ciertas cosas. Me parece un problema.
Es if you give me technique, I'll give you poetry, que dijo Le Corbusier. No, es que es esto. O sea...
Muy bien. Pues sí. Oye, pues muchas gracias. Mañana continúa Artificial Architectures. A la mañana...
Hay un taller que empieza a las 10, que imparte Darío y Jacopo, y ahí esta mañana ha habido profesores de todas las edades, estudiantes, sobre todo los estudiantes estaban muy contentos porque había profesores, ahí estábamos todos en un plano de igualdad, ¿no? Y entonces, nada, si queréis, por supuesto, ya os lo he dicho, aunque no os hayáis inscrito, si estáis en la puerta, los pocos resistentes que estáis aquí, si estáis en la puerta, pues somos muy ciencia blanda.
¿Es en la 2G4
y os vamos a
también?
dejar pasar, obviamente, y haremos lo que sea para que esté todo el mundo.
¿Es en la 2G4
como participante.
también? 2G4
en la 2G4.
también.
Así que muchas gracias y gracias por aguantar.